In the flickering shadows of revolutionary Paris, a young candlemaker named Etienne discovers secret messages hidden within layers of wax codes that draw him into a web of rebellion, betrayal, and destiny. As each lantern he crafts becomes a spark of hope for the uprising, Etienne must decide whether to risk everything for freedom or let the fire consume all he holds dear. Will his light ignite salvation for the city, or burn it to ashes? The dawn was slow to break over the narrow streets of Paris, but inside the small candle shop nestled between a baker's storefront and a leatherworker's stall, morning light spilled softly through the stained glass windows. Etienne Moreau sat hunched over a wooden bench, the warm glow of a flickering candle casting dancing shadows across his youthful face. His slender fingers were coated with a thin sheen of wax as he meticulously molded the fragile frame of a lantern, his dark eyes focused with earnest concentration. The scent of melting wax mingled with the faint aroma of beeswax and tallow, a familiar and comforting olfactory tapestry that had become the backdrop to his days. He had been an apprentice here for 3 years now, learning the delicate art of candle making under the watchful eye of Jacques Lambert, the master craftsman who had taken him in after his family's modest fortunes had waned. The shop was a haven of quiet routine amid a city that was increasingly restless. Etienne was content in his work, shaping light in a world that often seemed shrouded in darkness. Yet today, an unusual restlessness stirred within him. As he carefully poured molten wax into the lantern's mold, Etienne noticed something peculiar, subtle irregularity beneath the smooth surface. His brow furrowed as he ran his finger lightly over the wax, detecting a faint pattern of lines and dots that seemed deliberately embedded beneath the translucent shell. Curiosity piqued, he reached for a small blade and gently scraped away a thin layer of wax. Beneath, a series of tiny symbols emerged, etched with precise care. It was a code, a message hidden in plain sight. Etienne's heart quickened. Who had placed this secret within the lantern? Was it a warning, a call for help, or a plan? His thoughts raced as the noise of the city filtered through the shop's wooden, door-raised voices. Hurried footsteps, the distant clang of metal on cobblestones. The streets of Paris were awakening with unease, whispers of discontent threading through the air like smoke. The revolution was no longer a distant murmur. It was a growing fire consuming the city's soul. Etienne glanced around the dimly lit shop. Jacques Lambert was at his workbench, shaping a thick pillar candle with practiced ease, his face lined with years of quiet wisdom. Madame Renard, the shop's owner, bustled about, her sharp eyes scanning the streets through a small window. Taking a deep breath, Etienne carefully folded the tiny note, his fingers trembling slightly. He knew, in that moment, that his life was about to change irrevocably. The lanterns he crafted were no longer mere tools of light. They had become vessels of secrets, of rebellion, and Etienne stood on the precipice of a dangerous path that would test his courage, loyalty, and very soul. Outside, the first flickers of unrest ignited the city's veins, and within the quiet candle shop, a young apprentice held the fragile spark of a revolution in his hands. The flicker in the darkness was just beginning to grow. Etienne's mornings were usually predictable. He would arrive before sunrise, the chill of the early hour lingering in the narrow streets, and enter the shop where the warmth of melting wax awaited him. Today, however, as his fingers worked instinctively, an unfamiliar tension tightened his chest. The discovery of the coded message was unlike anything he had encountered in his simple existence. It was as if the lantern itself had become a silent sentinel, guarding secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. He recalled the stories whispered in hushed tones at the market tales of nobles and commoners clashing, of voices rising against tyranny. But such matters seemed distant, the concerns of men and women far beyond his lowly station. Yet now, the coded message thrust him into the heart of those turbulent tides. Jacques noticed the change in Etienne's demeanor. "You seem distracted, lad," he said kindly, wiping his hands on a rag. "The lanterns demand care, but the soul must not wander too far." Etienne hesitated, then nodded. "I found something. A message hidden inside the wax." The older man's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "The city is changing, Etienne, and sometimes the smallest light reveals the darkest shadows. Be cautious." Madame Renard approached, her voice low. "If you ever need supplies, or a safe place to speak, the shop is more than it seems. Paris holds many secrets, and so do the people within it." The day outside quickened, the distant sounds of unrest growing louder. Etienne folded the lantern carefully, the coded message a heavy weight in his pocket. The flicker of flame in his heart had been kindled, and the darkness beyond the candle shop was no longer a distant threat, but a looming presence demanding his attention. As he stepped into the bustling street, Etienne felt the first true tremors of a revolution stirring beneath his feet, and the path ahead was fraught with danger and hope in equal measure. The flicker in the darkness was no longer just light, it was a call to arms, whispered in wax and flame, and Etienne Moreau was listening. The narrow streets of Paris had long held their secrets, but tonight they whispered louder than ever. Etienne Moreau, his heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, moved silently through the labyrinthine alleys behind the bustling markets. The coded message he had discovered inside the wax lanterns haunted his thoughts, a puzzle he was desperate to understand. His apprenticeship at the candle shop had taught him patience and precision, but nothing had prepared him for the labyrinth of secrets he was now stepping into. The city during the day was a cacophony of life, but at night it transformed. Shadows stretched and merged, and voices fell to hushed tones. Etienne's footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestones as he followed the faintest sounds of hushed conversation. In a secluded courtyard, dim lanterns flickered, casting irregular shadows on worn stone walls. A small group huddled, their faces half hidden beneath coarse cloaks and low hats, the air thick with urgency and fear. Etienne's breath caught when a sharp voice cut through the murmurs of voice, both commanding and warm. It belonged to Claire Dubois. Claire's presence was striking. Her auburn hair, though restrained by a simple kerchief, caught the pale light and seemed to glow with an inner fire. Her sharp features softened only when she smiled, which was rare but genuine. She spoke with a fierce intensity about justice, equality, and the need to dismantle the old order. Etienne listened, spellbound by her words and the passion behind them. "This city, Etienne," she said quietly when their eyes met, "is choking on the lies of those who hold power. We cannot wait for change to come from them. We must light the way ourselves, even if it means walking through fire." Etienne felt the weight of her gaze, a mixture of challenge and invitation. The coded messages he had found were more than cryptic wax patterns. They were the lifeblood of a movement stretching in the shadows, a fragile thread of hope weaving through the turmoil, yet fear gnawed at him. The risks were clear, betrayal lurked at every corner, and the law was unforgiving. "How can I be certain?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "How do I know I'm not stepping into a trap?" Claire's eyes softened. "Trust is a currency we spend carefully, Etienne. But knowledge is power, and silence is death. You have already taken the first step. Now you must decide how far you are willing to go." Their conversation was interrupted by the muffled clatter of boots in the distance. Claire's expression hardened. "We must move. There are eyes everywhere. Before he could respond, Etienne was swept along with the group through winding passages and hidden doors, deeper into the city's underbelly. The air grew colder, and the scent of damp stone mingled with the faint smoke of distant fires. Back in the quiet warmth of the candle shop, Jacques Lambert awaited his return. The older man's hands, roughened by years of crafting wax and wick, trembled slightly as he lit a lantern. The golden glow bathed his lined face as he regarded Etienne with a mixture of pride and concern. "You've crossed a threshold, lad," Jacques said softly, "one that carries both light and shadow. Keep your wits about you. The fire you seek to kindle may burn brighter than you expect, and it may burn you." Etienne nodded, the resolve in his chest hardening. The city's streets were alive with danger and possibility. He was no longer just an apprentice. He was a bearer of secrets, a flicker of hope in the gathering darkness. As the shadows lengthened outside, Etienne knew his journey had only just begun, and somewhere in the depths of Paris, the revolution waited. The pale morning light filtered weakly through the grimy window panes of the candle workshop, dust motes swirling in the stagnant air. Etienne Moreau sat hunched over his workbench, hands steady despite the tremor of unease in his chest. Before him lay a wax lantern, its surface smooth and gleaming faintly beneath the flickering candlelight he had just finished moulding within it. His gaze lingered on the faint etching barely visible beneath the wax, the secret code that had pulled him into a world far beyond the simple rhythms of candle-making. Jacques Lambert entered quietly, his footsteps muffled by the worn wooden floorboards. The older man's face, creased with years of toil and tempered by a kindness that Etienne had come to trust, was serious today. "Etienne," he began in a low voice, "this path you tread grows darker by the day. The city is changing, and those who wield the old power will not yield without a fight." Etienne looked up, eyes shadowed by doubt. "But, Jacques, if we do not act, if we do not send these messages, who will? The people suffer. The lanterns must carry our voices." Jacques sighed, resting a heavy hand on Etienne's shoulder. "I do not question your bravery. But remember, courage can be a double-edged blade. Trust is fragile. One misstep, one betrayal, and all we hope for could be lost." The apprentice nodded, tightening his grip on the lantern as if to anchor himself. The warnings were clear, yet the fire within him blazed brighter. He was no longer the naive boy who had arrived weeks before, eager only to perfect his craft. Now, each lantern held weighty secrets, each flame a symbol of defiance. Far from the modest shop, in the opulent chambers of Count Henry de Villiers, the air was thick with the scent of burning oil lamps and expensive perfumes. The Count stood before a sprawling table strewn with maps, letters, and reports from his network of spies. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the latest intelligence brought by Philippe Rousseau, a man as slippery as shadow and twice as dangerous. "The revolutionaries grow bold," Count Henry murmured, voice cold as steel. "These lanterns, they think their whispers in wax will shield them. But we will snuff out their light before it can spread." Philippe bowed slightly, the faintest smirk playing at his lips. "Our agents are embedded, my lord. The traitors will reveal themselves soon enough." Count Henry's gaze hardened. "Ensure no one escapes scrutiny. Paris is ours to command, and I will see these insurgents crushed beneath the heel of order." Back in the labyrinthine alleys of Paris, Etienne met with Claire Dubois beneath the cloak of darkness. The flickering street lamps cast long shadows, and the distant clang of metal from the city's unrest echoed like a heartbeat. Claire's eyes gleamed with fierce intelligence and a fiery passion that both inspired and unsettled Etienne. "The messages you carry," she whispered urgently, "they are more than words. They are the lifeblood of our cause. But the enemy watches closely. We must be vigilant." Etienne nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "I fear the walls have ears, and the streets betray us underfoot." Claire reached out, her hand briefly touching his arm, steadying, reassuring. "Then we must be shadows ourselves, Etienne. Trust those who have earned it, question the rest." Their alliance, fragile yet vital, marked a turning point for Etienne. The quiet shop and the steady rhythm of crafting lanterns had given way to a perilous game of secrets and survival. Days later, as twilight bled into night, Etienne navigated the crowded streets with a lantern concealed beneath his cloak. The city was a restless beast, alive with murmurs of rebellion and the threat of violence. Eyes searched the crowds, some friendly, many wary, and a few filled with cruel intent. Each step was measured, each breath controlled, as Etienne approached a hidden meeting point. The lantern's faint glow was a beacon and a burden. The coded message within could alter the fate of friends and foes alike. He felt the invisible chains of suspicion tightening around him, the realization that betrayal lurked in every shadow. In the quiet moments before he handed off the lantern, Etienne's heart pounded not only with fear but with a resolute fire. The revolution was no longer a distant rumble. Etienne was a tempest that demanded his courage and tested his loyalties. As he disappeared into the night, the flickering light of the lantern cast dancing shadows on the cobblestones, a fragile emblem of hope amid the gathering darkness. But in the distance, unseen eyes followed, and the game of trust and treachery tightened its grip on all who dared to dream of change. The chapter closes on Etienne's conflicted gaze, caught between the steady guidance of his mentor, the inspiring but dangerous allure of revolution, and the cold, calculating forces marshaled against him. The path ahead is uncertain, and the lanterns he crafts carry more than light. They carry the fragile hopes of a city on the brink. The morning light struggled to penetrate the thick veil of smoke that clung to the Parisian sky, casting an eerie orange pallor over the city streets. Etienne Moreau wiped the sweat and soot from his brow as he stepped out of the cramped candle shop, the familiar scent of melted wax and beeswax lingering in his clothes. The once quiet neighborhood now thrummed with the restless energy of unrest, distant cries and clanging metal rising over the usual hum of market day. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the wax lantern, its glass panes fogged from the heat of the flickering candle inside. The lantern was not merely a source of light tonight. It carried a secret message, hidden in the patterns of melted wax and carved symbols only those in the revolutionary network could decipher. Etienne's heart pounded not just from the exertion, but from the weight of responsibility pressing upon him. Outside, the streets were ablaze with chaos. Barricades had been hastily erected, piles of furniture and timber blocking the narrow alleys, flames licking hungrily at the edges, sending sparks spiraling into the smoke-darkened sky. The acrid smell of burning wood mixed with the harsher scent of gunpowder and sweat. Etienne moved cautiously, his dark eyes sharp beneath furrowed brows as he navigated the labyrinthine streets, every shadow seeming to conceal a threat. He paused briefly behind a stone pillar, listening to the distant shouts of protesters clashing with soldiers. The cacophony was chaotic, the rattle of musket fire, the crash of broken glass, the sharp, desperate cries of voices, both angry and fearful. His breath caught as a sudden explosion sent a shower of sparks overhead, illuminating the faces of men and women locked in fierce struggle. Despite the turmoil, Etienne's resolve hardened. Each lantern he carried was a beacon, a fragment of hope in a city that seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. He thought of the coded messages he had painstakingly deciphered just days before, the whispered plans for coordinated strikes, the secret meetings in shadowed rooms. The revolution was no longer a distant murmur. It was a roaring flame consuming Paris. Turning a corner, Etienne found himself in a narrow alley where the glow of a single lantern marked a meeting point. Claire Dubois emerged from the darkness, her auburn hair catching the firelight, her sharp eyes scanning the street. She wore the plain dress of the common folk, but Etienne knew the fierce intelligence and fierce compassion that burned within her. "You're late," she whispered, though a flicker of relief softened her tone. "The streets are thick with soldiers," Etienne replied, handing her the lantern. "This message is urgent. The next attack is planned for dawn." Claire nodded, her gaze steady despite the danger surrounding them. "We must move quickly. The city holds its breath tonight." Their whispered dialogue was interrupted by a sudden crash nearby. Etienne's pulse quickened as footsteps approached. Soldiers, no doubt. They melted into the shadows, hearts pounding, as the night erupted into a chorus of chaos once more. Back near the candle shop, Jacques Lambert observed from the doorway, his face etched with worry. The older man's hands, worn from years of crafting wax, clenched tightly. "Be careful, Etienne," he murmured to the empty street. "This path is fraught with peril." Jacques understood the stakes as well as Etienne did. The city was aflame with rebellion, and every act of defiance was a spark that could ignite hope or destruction. Meanwhile, atop a grand balcony overlooking the city, Count Henry de Villiers stood like a statue carved from cold marble. His refined aristocratic attire seemed almost out of place against the backdrop of burning barricades and screaming crowds. His eyes, sharp and calculating, reflected the flickering flames below. "So, the city burns," he said quietly, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "And with it, the dreams of these insurgents." Beside him, Philippe Rousseau, ever watchful, reported the movements of the revolutionaries. "The messenger has been seen delivering lanterns near the market district." Count Henry's gaze hardened. "Then we must snuff out this light before it spreads." As the night deepened, Etienne continued his dangerous journey, the glow of his lantern casting long shadows on the cobblestones. Each step was a test of courage, each breath a mingling of fear and hope. The fire that consumed Paris was not only outside, but burning fiercely within him, a flickering flame of justice amid the encroaching darkness. He could no longer be merely an apprentice. He was a bearer of messages, a keeper of secrets, entwined irrevocably in the fate of a city on the brink. And as the first embers of dawn threatened to rise, Etienne knew that the flames of revolution would not be easily extinguished. Yet, with every flicker, a question lingered in his mind: how much must be sacrificed before justice could truly be won? The burning city held its breath, and so did he. The room was thick with the scent of melting wax and the faint musk of old wood. A single candle flickered on the worn table, casting trembling shadows that danced across the rough beams overhead. Etienne sat opposite Claire, the glow reflecting in his dark, attentive eyes, his fingers nervously tracing the edges of a folded cloth. The noise from the city below, a distant murmur of unrest and sporadic shouts, felt miles away, yet it pressed heavily upon their small sanctuary. Claire's auburn hair caught the candlelight in fiery strands as she hesitated. Her sharp features softened by a vulnerability Etienne had never seen before. The weight of her secret seemed to bow her slender shoulders as she finally spoke, her voice low and trembling. "There is something I must tell you, Etienne," she began, her gaze flickering to the small window, then back to his earnest face. "It is not easy, but I trust you." Etienne's heart quickened, a knot of anticipation tightening in his chest. "Whatever it is, Claire, you can tell me." She drew a deep breath, steeling herself against the apprehension that threatened to silence her. "I am not merely a revolutionary like you or the others. My family, we are of noble blood." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Etienne's hand stilled, wax smudges marking his palm as his mind raced to reconcile this new truth with the woman before him, the fierce, compassionate ally who had stood by him through peril and uncertainty. "Noble blood," he repeated cautiously, searching her eyes for any hint of jest or deceit. Claire nodded, her expression somber. "My father was a nobleman, loyal to the crown, but I chose a different path. The ideals of equality and justice called to me louder than the privileges of my birth. I have sacrificed much, family, safety, even my name, to stand with those who seek to change this city, this country." Etienne's thoughts spun. The revolution was a tangled web of loyalties and betrayals, but Claire's revelation added a new shade of complexity. Could someone born into privilege truly understand the suffering of the oppressed? Yet, here she was, risking everything for the cause. "Why tell me now?" he asked softly. "Because I trust you," she replied, her voice steadying. "And because I need you to know who I am, so that together we can face whatever comes next." A silence fell between them, filled only by the soft crackling of the candle's flame and the distant echoes of a city on the brink of upheaval. Etienne felt the fragile threads of their alliance strengthen, woven tighter by this shared truth. "I am grateful you told me," he said finally, a quiet resolve settling over him. "It changes nothing between us, Claire. We fight for the same cause." She allowed herself a small, weary smile. "Thank you, Etienne. That means more than you know." Outside, the murmur of the streets grew louder, footsteps pounding, voices rising in protest, the unmistakable scent of smoke carried on the night air. The revolution was no longer a distant rumble. It had arrived at their doorstep. Etienne rose, moving to the window. He watched as flickers of torchlight wove through the narrow alleys below, the city ablaze with the restless energy of change. His thoughts turned to his family, especially Lucien, and the dangers that now loomed closer than ever. "We must be ready," he said, turning back to Claire, "for the battles ahead, for the sacrifices we may have to make." She met his gaze, determination shining in her eyes. Together, their hands met across the table. The warmth of their clasp, a small defiance against the cold uncertainty beyond the walls. The candle flickered once more, the flame steadying as if in silent agreement. In that fragile light, two souls united by hope and hardship, prepared to face the storm that threatened to consume them all. The revolution was no longer a distant dream. It was their reality, and they would meet it, side by side. But as the shadows lengthened and the city's fires grew, Etienne could not shake the unease, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. How many secrets remained hidden in the flicker of lantern light, and how deep did the betrayals run? The answers would come soon enough, carried on the restless winds of change that swept through Paris. For now, all that mattered was the bond forged in that quiet Attica, bond that might yet light the way through the darkest nights. The candle's flame danced on, a fragile beacon in the encroaching gloom, whispering promises of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring power of trust. And in the heart of the city, the revolution's fire burned ever brighter. The tavern was alive with murmurs, a low hum of voices barely above a whisper, as shadows danced against the cracked plaster walls. Etienne Moreau sat near the hearth, his fingers tracing the rim of a chipped clay cup, his dark eyes scanning the anxious faces around him. The flickering candlelight cast uneven glimmers on worn coats and tired eyes. But beneath the surface, an undercurrent of suspicion pulsed steadily. "I heard something disturbing," murmured one man, his voice tight and cautious. "Plans leaked again." "Another arrest last night." Etienne's heart tightened. The revolution was fragile as a flame in the wind, and now it seemed the very shadows that protected them also harbored enemies. He exchanged a glance with Claire Dubois, whose fiery auburn hair seemed to catch the candle's glow, her sharp eyes reflecting the same unease. "We must find the source," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "If there is a mole, they will unravel everything we've fought for." Etienne nodded, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He had barely come to terms with the dangers of the rebellion, and now betrayal lurked within their ranks, threatening to consume them all. Far from the warmth of the tavern, Philippe Rousseau moved like a shadow through the twisting alleys of Paris. His cloak was pulled tight against the chill night air, footsteps silent on the cobblestones. With each step, he carried secrets stolen from those who trusted him a spy serving Count Henry de Villiers, whose cold eyes sought to extinguish the flame of revolution. Philippe paused beneath a flickering street lamp, the glow revealing his sharp features etched with cunning. He clutched a folded parchment close, the encoded messages that had fallen into his hands, now weapons in the hands of the old regime. The distant sounds of unrest, the clatter of a wagon, the murmur of an approaching patrolry minded him of the stakes. Every secret delivered was a nail in the coffin of the revolutionaries' hopes. Back in the candle shop, Etienne sat with Jacques Lambert, his mentor, and Claire. The room smelled of melted wax and wood smoke, a fragile sanctuary amidst the chaos beyond the door. Etienne spread several lanterns on the rough wooden table, their surfaces still warm from recent crafting. His fingers, steady and sure, examined the subtle irregularities, tiny imperfections that betrayed the presence of hidden codes. "The messages are becoming riskier," Jacques said gravely, his weathered hands resting on the table. "Someone is listening." Claire's voice was fierce. "We must move quickly. If they know our plans, more lives will be lost." Etienne felt a cold resolve harden within him. They were being hunted from within, and the betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Days later, a secret meeting convened in a cramped, dimly lit room behind a shuttered bakery. The air was thick with unease as revolutionaries gathered, faces drawn and voices tight. Accusations flew like sparks, igniting anger and fear. "How could one of us betray the cause?" one man demanded, his fist pounding the table. "We must be careful with words," Claire cautioned, her eyes steady. "But we cannot ignore the truth. The traitor endangers us all." Etienne's gaze swept the room, searching for signs, furtive glances, nervous shifts, whispered denials. Trust, once their strongest bond, now frayed like a worn thread. The meeting ended with no resolution, only a chilling reminder that the fight for Paris was as much against enemies within as without. Etienne returned to his lanterns, the wax now a symbol not only of hope, but of the fragile trust that held them together. The coded messages had to be safeguarded, their secrets protected at all costs. He understood now that the revolution was not just a battle of swords and fire, but of silence and shadows. As Paris simmered with unrest, Etienne's determination grew. He would find the traitor, expose the lies, and protect the fragile light of justice flickering amidst the darkness. For in this city of fire and betrayal, the cost of silence was death not just of bodies, but of hope itself. The chapter closed with Etienne standing alone beneath the dim glow of a street lantern, the cold wind whispering through the narrow streets. His breath formed pale clouds, and in his eyes burned the fierce light of resolve. The enemy was close, but so too was the courage to face what lay ahead. Would he uncover the traitor before more lives were lost? The city held its breath, and so did Etienne. The workshop was silent except for the faint crackle of the candle's flame and the soft scratching of Etienne's hand as he carefully traced the delicate patterns embedded in the wax. His eyes, wide and dark, reflected the flickering light, mirroring the turmoil within. Once, these hands had been steady only for the humble craft of shaping wax and wick. Now they trembled with the weight of secrets that could alter the fate of Paris itself. Etienne leaned back, his slender fingers lingering on the lantern before him. It was more than a mere vessel of light. It was a bearer of hope, a silent messenger in a city consumed by shadows and fire. The coded script hidden inside was a lifeline, whispered plans and warnings concealed beneath layers of wax, carried through the streets like fragile promises. The room smelled of beeswax and smoke, the scent mingling with the faint musk of old wood and the lingering traces of soot on Etienne's skin. He rubbed his palms together, trying to steady the flutter of nerves that danced beneath his skin. How had he come so far from the timid apprentice who once feared the very idea of rebellion? The transformation felt as slow and inexorable as the melting wax itself and inevitable reshaping. A sudden creak at the door startled him, and he turned to see Jacques Lambert enter, his weathered face softened by a kindly smile. The master candlemaker's hands were thick and worn, yet they moved with a careful grace as he approached the table. "You carry more than wax in your hands now, Etienne," Jacques said quietly, placing a firm hand on the young man's shoulder. "These lanterns are not just tools for light, they are the sparks of justice in a dark time. Remember, each flame you bear is a beacon for those who cannot speak aloud." Etienne nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I feel the weight, Jacques. It's heavier than I imagined. Sometimes I wonder if I am capable of carrying it." Jacques' eyes, deep with years of wisdom and unspoken sorrow, met his. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to go on despite it. You have that in abundance, Etienne. The words settled over him like a balm, steadying the storm within. Yet, as Jacques departed, Etienne knew that the true test awaited beyond the safety of the workshop walls. Night had fallen over Paris, cloaking the city in a shadowy veil punctuated by distant cries and the occasional flash of torchlight. Etienne's footsteps echoed softly against the cobblestones as he moved swiftly, the lantern cradled in his arms like a fragile heart. Each step was measured, every breath mindful. The streets were fraught with danger, and the eyes of spies and soldiers lurked in every corner. The lantern's glow cast a warm pool of light around him, a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. Yet Etienne could feel the invisible weight of the messages he carried, the lives tethered to each secret word. His youthful face, usually animated with curiosity, was now etched with solemn determination. He recalled the faces of those he fought for, the hungry children in the alleys, the weary workers, his own brother Lucien, innocent and unaware of the storm gathering around them. The lanterns were more than duty, they were a promise. Returning to the workshop, the first pale light of dawn brushing against the windows, Etienne set the lantern down carefully. He reached for fresh wax and began to mold another candle, embedding new messages within its heart. The candle's flame flickered as he worked, shadows dancing across the walls, as if the fire itself whispered encouragement. With each careful stroke, Etienne felt a quiet courage blooming inside him. The weight of wax was heavy, but it was also the weight of justice, hope, and the unyielding spirit of a city poised on the brink of change. As the sun rose, casting golden light through the dusty panes, Etienne knew that his journey was far from over. The lanterns he crafted would shine in the darkest nights, guiding those who dared to dream of freedom. And though the path ahead was shrouded in peril, he was ready to bear the weight, one flickering flame at a time. But even as he prepared for the days to come, a silent question gnawed at him. Could the fragile light of a single lantern truly withstand the consuming fire of revolution? Only time would tell. And so, with the dawn breaking over Paris, Etienne steeled himself for the trials ahead, his hands marked by wax and soot, his heart ignited by a flame that would not be easily extinguished. The weight of wax was more than physical, it was the burden of a cause, the spark of rebellion, and the hope of a brighter tomorrow. The rain had begun as a mere drizzle, soft and tentative, but now it fell in earnest, drumming on the cobblestones of the narrow alleyways that twisted like veins through the heart of Paris. Etienne Moreau pulled his cloak tighter around his slender frame, the damp chill seeping through the fabric and settling into his bones. The lantern he carried cast a wavering light, the flame flickering wildly as the wind snatched at the canvas and wax. Drops of water splattered against the glowing glass, distorting the shadows that danced on the uneven walls. Etienne's heart beat with a frantic rhythm, echoing the tumult outside. The city was alive with unrested echoes of distant shouts. The crackling of fires burning behind shuttered windows, the clatter of hurried footsteps on wet stone. Tonight, more than ever, the line between safety and peril was razor thin. He paused beneath an overhanging eave, eyes scanning the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with deliberate caution. The man's features were obscured beneath a hood, but the intensity in his eyes shone like embers caught in a dying flame. Etienne's breath hitched. This was the contact Claire had warned him about, the messenger who claimed to hold critical information for the revolutionaries. "You are Etienne Moreau." The voice was low, gravelly, and edged with urgency. "I am," Etienne replied, gripping the lantern tighter. "And you?" "A friend, if you choose to trust me. There are eyes everywhere, enemies, who would see us crushed before dawn. What I carry could turn the tide, but it must not fall into the wrong hands." The words hung heavy between them, mingling with the scent of wet earth and burning wood carried on the wind. Etienne's mind raced. Trust was a luxury few could afford in these days. Betrayal had already shattered alliances, and every whispered secret risked death. Yet the promise of aid, of knowledge, was a flame too bright to ignore. Before he could answer, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Etienne." Claire emerged from the shadows, her auburn hair damp and clinging to her determined face. Her eyes blazed with a mixture of fear and fierce resolve. "You should not be here alone. This meeting, it reeks of danger." Etienne glanced between the two figures, uncertainty warring with his burgeoning courage. "He says he has information vital to our cause." Claire's gaze narrowed, or a trap. The stranger stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I understand your caution, but I risk much by coming here. Count Henry tightens his grip, and time runs short. If you refuse to listen, the revolution will falter." A sudden roar shattered the fragile, distant explosion echoed through the city, flames licking the horizon where the night sky bled red. The sounds of chaos surged closer, desperate cries, the clash of metal, the pounding of feet. Paris was burning. Claire grasped Etienne's arm, her voice a whisper yet sharpened by urgency. "We must decide now." Etienne swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing upon him like the thick smoke that now crept through the alleys. His gaze settled on the lantern's trembling flame, a fragile beacon amidst the encroaching darkness. Trusting this stranger could mean salvation or destruction, he drew a steadying breath. I will listen, but if this is betrayal, the consequences will be dire. The man nodded solemnly, producing a folded piece of parchment from beneath his cloak. Etienne took it, fingers trembling as he unfolded the document. The coded markings were intricate, a language only those versed in secrecy could decode. Yet the urgency was clear. Plans for an imminent strike, vulnerabilities in Count Henry's defenses, and warnings of spies within their own ranks. Back at the candle shop, Etienne sat alone in the flickering light, the glow of a newly crafted lantern casting long shadows across the wooden walls. His mind churned with questions and doubts. Could he trust the messenger? Was this information genuine or a cunning ploy to dismantle the revolution from within? Claire's words echoed in his ears. The line between friend and foe grows thinner every day. Etienne's fingers absently traced the patterns on the lantern's surface, the wax cool beneath his touch. In this fragile light, the lantern was more than a source of illumination. It was a symbol of hope, a weapon against the growing darkness. His decision would shape the path ahead, thrusting him deeper into the perilous struggle that consumed Paris. The fires of revolution burned hotter with each passing hour, and at this crossroads, Etienne's courage would be tested as never before. Outside, the city's heartbeat quickened, a symphony of chaos and defiance. The night was far from over, and the flickering flames of justice demanded a choice. As the first light of dawn threatened to break, Etienne resolved to stand firm. The lantern's glow a silent vow against the shadows. The revolution was no longer a distant whisper, it was a roaring blaze, and he would be its bearer, no matter the cost. But in the depths of his heart, a question lingered. As persistent as the flicker of the flame, could trust survive in a city consumed by fire and betrayal? The answer would come soon enough, beneath the burning skies of Paris. The night had fallen with a heavy shroud over Paris. The city streets dimly lit by the occasional flicker of distant fires and the rare lanterns swaying in the cold breeze. Etienne Moreau moved silently through the narrow alleys, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and urgency. The mission had ended, disastrously. Key revolutionaries had been seized by the guards, their fates unknown, their voices silenced in the dark cells of a grim prison. The weight of failure pressed down on Etienne's chest, each breath shallow as he approached the forbidding stone facade that loomed before him. He paused, the rough cobblestones uneven beneath his worn shoes, and peered through the iron bars of a nearby window. Inside, shadows danced against the cold walls, and faint murmurs of despair reached his ears. The faces of those taken friends, comrades haunted him. The coded lanterns he had so carefully crafted, the secret messages he had carried through perilous streets, had not been enough to prevent this loss. A bitter taste of guilt burned in his throat. Had his hands, once steady in shaping wax, become instruments of doom? Etienne's thoughts spiraled, the silence of the city outside contrasting sharply with the turmoil within. He recalled Jacques Lambert's words from earlier that day, steady, measured, and full of an unyielding kindness. Jacques, the master candle maker who had taught him not only the craft but the quiet courage to endure, had been a pillar in the storm. The price of silence, Jacques had said, is often paid in the currency of sacrifice. But the flame we carry, Etienne, must never be allowed to die. The candle shop was a sanctuary amid the chaos, its air thick with the scent of melting wax and wood smoke. Jacques sat behind the workbench, his hands weathered and worn, yet steady as ever. The soft glow of half-finished lanterns cast gentle shadows on his lined face. He looked up as Etienne entered, eyes filled with the sorrow of shared loss, but also with a resolute spark. "You carry a heavy burden," Jacques began, voice low but unwavering. "But remember, no great change comes without cost. The revolution we fight for is not merely against men or crowns, but against the darkness that seeks to smother the dawn." Etienne nodded, the knot in his throat loosening only slightly. "I feel as though I have failed them all," he confessed, "as if my silence has condemned them." Jacques stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Etienne's shoulder. "Silence is not your burden alone, and it is not the absence of sound, but the promise of a louder cry yet to come. We must learn from this, and let it kindle our resolve, rather than extinguish our hope." The following dawn found Etienne along the banks of the Seine, where Claire Dubois awaited him. The early morning mist clung to the water's surface, and the city's awakening murmurs filled the air. Claire's auburn hair caught the pale light, and her eyes, sharp and fierce, met Etienne's with an intensity forged by shared hardship. "We knew the road would be perilous," she said quietly, "but we cannot let grief anchor us in despair. Our fight is for those who cannot speak, for those who still dream of justice." Etienne felt the weight of her words settle within him, a mixture of sorrow and fierce determination. "I fear the cost is too high," he admitted, "but to abandon the cause now would be to betray all we hold dear." Claire reached out, her hand briefly clasping his. "Then we carry the flame together, no matter the darkness ahead." That night, alone in his small attic room, Etienne sat by the window, a single candle burning on the wooden desk. The flame flickered uncertainly, casting dancing shadows over the scattered scraps of wax and parchment. Outside, the distant sounds of unrest echoed faintly, a reminder that the city was far from peace. He stared into the flame, its fragile glow a metaphor for his own wavering spirit. The faces of those lost haunted him still. But within that flicker he glimpsed something more, the promise of light after darkness, of hope forged through sacrifice. With a deep breath, Etienne reached out and steadied the candle's flame, his resolve hardening like the wax he shaped. The revolution's path was strewn with loss and silence, but its light, his light, would endure. The fight was far from over, and he would carry the lantern forward, bearing its message through the shadows of Paris. As the candle burned steadily on, Etienne whispered into the night, "For justice, for hope. For those who cannot speak, the flame will never die." Outside, the city held its breath, poised on the edge of change, as the first light of a new day began to break. The morning air in Paris carried a chill that seemed to seep into Etienne Moreau's bones as he navigated the narrow streets toward a place he had avoided for many years. The familiar clamor of the city, the shouts of market vendors, the distant clang of metalworkers, the occasional bark of a street dog mingled with an undercurrent of unrest that had grown louder each day. Yet Etienne's steps were steady, driven by something deeper than the noise around him. Turning a corner, he found himself standing before a shadowed alleyway, its entrance framed by crumbling stone walls streaked with soot and time. A small weathered plaque was affixed there, its inscription faded but still legible, in memory of Jean Moreau, taken by the fires of tyranny. 1789. Etienne's breath caught. This was the spot where his father had fallen, crushed beneath the weight of a violent crackdown during one of the earlier uprisings, and event that had left a wound in Etienne's heart that never truly healed. He knelt slowly, fingers tracing the cold, rough surface of the plaque. The flickering shadows cast by a nearby lantern danced across the stone, as if the flames themselves were speaking of a past too heavy to forget. Memories surged unbidden, his father's strong hands, rough from years of labor, the quiet courage in his eyes as he told Etienne to be brave. The chaos of that dreadful night when soldiers stormed the streets and Jean was caught in the crossfire. Etienne swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. The pain of loss was raw, yet beneath it lay a burning ember of resolve. He had come here not to linger in sorrow, but to draw strength from the memory of the man who had given everything for justice. Rising slowly, Etienne whispered a silent vow into the cold air, to protect his family, to guard his younger brother Lucien's innocence, and to carry forward the fight his father had begun. The familiar creak of the candle shop door behind him pulled Etienne back to the present. Inside, the warm glow of lanterns cast soft pools of light over the wooden shelves cluttered with wax, wicks, and half-finished lanterns. Jacques Lambert, his mentor and friend, looked up from his workbench, his face lined but gentle. Etienne, Jacques greeted softly, noticing the solemn expression shadowing the young apprentice's features. "You look as if you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders today." Etienne offered a faint, tired smile. "I was visiting a place from my past, a reminder of why this fight matters." Jacques nodded, reaching out to brush a streak of soot from Etienne's cheek. "Your father was a brave man, and so are you. Remember, the flame of justice is not just in the streets it burns here," he said, tapping Etienne's chest lightly. Within you, the reassurance filled Etienne with a fragile warmth. The candlelight flickered, shadows stretching and shrinking as if echoing the turmoil within. Later that afternoon, Etienne found himself in the small courtyard behind their modest home, watching his younger brother Lucien play. The boy's laughter tumbled through the air like a fragile melody, untouched by the gathering storm outside. Lucien chased a makeshift wooden hoop, his eyes bright with innocent joy, oblivious to the dangers creeping ever closer. Etienne's heart tightened at the sight. The world was changing rapidly, and the price of revolution was steep. He crouched quietly by the wall, hidden from view, and clutched a freshly crafted lantern, its glass shimmering with the promise of light. He knew he would soon carry messages through perilous streets, risking everything to keep hope alive. From the distance, a roar rose, protesters clamoring, the clash of metal, the crackle of distant fires. Etienne's gaze hardened. The city was aflame with unrest, and the battle for justice was no longer a distant whisper, but a raging inferno. He rose, taking one last look at Lucien's carefree face before stepping back into the shadows. The lantern's glow illuminated his determined eyes as he prepared to face whatever trials awaited. This was his moment to honor his father's sacrifice, to shield his brother's innocence, and to kindle the light of revolution in the darkest of nights. As Etienne disappeared into the maze of Parisian streets, the echoes of the past whispered alongside the flickering flames, urging him onward into the uncertain dawn. The late afternoon sun cast a fading amber glow through the grimy windows of the candlemaker's workshop, where Etienne Moreau sat hunched over a cluttered table. His fingers, smeared with wax and soot, moved with careful precision as he molded a fresh lantern, his mind racing with possibilities. Around him, the scent of melting beeswax mingled with the faint, musky temps of old wood and oil lamps. Outside, the distant murmur of the restless city seeped in, the growing unrest of Paris a persistent whisper beneath the tranquil enclosure of his trade. Etienne's eyes, dark and sharp, reflected the flickering flame dancing atop a small test lantern. It was not just any flame, it was a beacon, a language born of fire and shadow. The coded messages hidden within the wax lanterns had been the spark that thrust him into the heart of the revolution, but now he sought to elevate this secret art to new heights. The old methods, while effective, were limited. The enemy's spies lurked everywhere, and the risk of interception grew with every message delivered. He adjusted the wick, then dipped a fine brush into colored wax red blue, green each shade chosen deliberately for its meaning. By varying the intensity and rhythm of the flame's flicker, he could create a complex language invisible to the untrained eye. His heart thudded with cautious excitement. This was more than craftsmanship. It was strategy, rebellion woven into the very light that could pierce the darkness. The workshop door creaked open, and Claire Dubois stepped inside, her auburn hair catching the last rays of daylight, her sharp eyes alight with curiosity and unspoken urgency. "Etienne," she whispered, closing the door softly behind her, "the city waits on every word we send. Your invention could change everything." Etienne looked up, a faint smile breaking his usually serious demeanor. "I hope so, Claire. If the flames can speak, then maybe we can outwit the shadows that hunt us." She stepped closer, the warmth of her presence a stark contrast to the chill that often gripped the streets outside. "Tell me how it works." With a steady hand, Etienne demonstrated the new lantern, the flame flickering in a deliberate cadence. Different colors, different flickers, a code within the light itself. No longer just messages sealed in wax, but signals that can travel unseen, unbroken. Claire's eyes gleamed with determination. If we can send warnings, rally allies, and coordinate attacks without the enemy's knowledge, the revolution's chances grow stronger. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jacques Lambert, Etienne's mentor and master candlemaker. The older man's worn hands bore the marks of decades spent shaping wax, and his kindly face softened as he regarded the younger's innovation. "You've come far, Etienne," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. This could light a new path for us all." Etienne felt a swell of pride but tempered it with humility. "It is not just my work," he replied. "It is ours, crafted from the courage of those who dare to hope." As dusk deepened, the trio worked late into the night, perfecting the lanterns that would soon carry the hopes and plans of a city on the brink. Outside, the sounds of distant protests and the occasional crackle of flames reminded them of the stakes at hand. When the first coded message was dispatched, Etienne stood beneath the shadowed eaves of a narrow street, lantern in hand. The colored flame flickered, pulsed, and danced an eloquent whisper in the dark. Unseen by all but those who knew its language, somewhere a comrade watched and understood. Somewhere hope was rekindled. The flame's light was fragile, yet fierce a symbol of justice and defiance. In that moment, Etienne felt the weight of his journey from apprentice to revolutionary bearer of light. The revolution was far from won, but with every lantern's glow, the darkness receded just a little more. And as the night deepened, the city held its breath, waiting for the flames to speak once more. The night had settled over Paris like a heavy shroud, the narrow streets whispering secrets carried on the chill wind. Inside the cramped candle shop, Etienne Moreau's heart pounded louder than the distant clamor of unrest outside. The lanterns he had so carefully crafted flickered softly, their warm glow casting dancing shadows on the worn wooden walls. Tonight, the fragile sanctuary of wax and flame would be shattered by a truth he had long feared. For weeks, rumors had circulated a leak within their ranks, whispered warnings of movements anticipated before they occurred. Etienne's discovery of coded messages hidden within the wax lanterns had brought him deeper into the fold of revolutionaries, but it had also exposed him to the danger lurking within their trusted circle. Philippe Rousseau, a man who had walked alongside them in the dim alleys and whispered plans beneath the veil of darkness, was no comrade. Etienne had pieced together the subtle inconsistencies, the furtive glances, the hurried whispers that fell silent when he approached. Now, clutching a folded piece of parchment concealed within a lantern's hollow base, Etienne waited. The air was thick with anticipation, the scent of melting wax mingling with the faint aroma of damp stone. Felipe entered, his footsteps cautious yet betraying none of the storm about to break. His sharp eyes flickered, catching the lantern light as if sensing the trap. Felipe, Etienne's voice broke the silence, steady but burdened with accusation. We need to speak. The words hung between them like a gauntlet thrown. Felipe's face tightened, a flicker of unease crossing the sharp planes of his features. What is this about? He asked, voice smooth but guarded. Etienne stepped closer, revealing the parchment. This message was meant for Count Henry's men, the very plans we shared. You betrayed us. The room seemed to constrict, the candle flames quivering as though shying from the revelation. Felipe's gaze hardened, a cold smile curling at the edge of his lips. You're clever, boy, but not clever enough. Before Etienne could react, the door creaked open and Claire Dubois slipped inside, her auburn hair catching the lantern light like embers in the dark. Her eyes, fierce yet shadowed by hurt, met Etienne's. We must act quickly, she urged, voice low but urgent. Our trust has been shattered, but the revolution cannot falter now. The weight of betrayal pressed down, suffocating in its intensity. Claire's confession of her own fears and the sacrifices she had made echoed in Etienne's mind, intertwining their resolve. The fragile web of alliances trembled, yet within the fracture lay a spark and ember of renewed determination. Jacques Lambert emerged from the shadows, his weathered hands cradling a broken lantern. The fragile glass lay shattered at his feet, a stark symbol of their fractured trust. We must mend what is broken, he intoned softly, with vigilance and with heart. Gathered in the secret cellar beneath the city, the revolutionaries huddled close, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of lanterns. Etienne's voice rose above the murmurs, steady and resolute. We have been betrayed, he acknowledged, but this will not be our undoing. We must be sharper, more united. The light we carry is more than wax and wicked, is hope, justice, and the courage to face the darkness. The murmurs grew into nods of agreement, the flame of rebellion rekindling despite the shadows cast by treachery. The night outside may have been fraught with peril, but within those walls, a new chapter was beginning, one forged in fire, tempered by betrayal, and fueled by an unyielding spirit. As the lanterns flickered and the city held its breath, Etienne realized that the path ahead would be darker yet brighter for the trials to come. The revolution was no longer just a dream. It was a crucible shaping the souls of those brave enough to hold the light. But the question remained, who could they truly trust in the gathering storm? And with that lingering doubt, the chapter closed, the lanterns casting long shadows that whispered of battles yet to come. The night had settled deep over Paris, the sky a heavy blanket of ink pierced only by the occasional flicker of a distant lantern. Inside a small, hidden room above a nondescript tavern, the air was thick with the mingled scents of damp stone and burning candles. Etienne Moreau sat across from Claire Dubois, their faces half lit by the wavering glow of a single candle set upon a rough wooden table. The shadows danced over their features, lending a restless energy to the moment. Claire's auburn hair caught the light, flames reflected in her sharp eyes, but there was a shadow behind them, a weight she had carried alone for too long. Etienne noticed a slight tremor in her fingers as she unfolded a folded piece of parchment, revealing the seal of a noble house, a mark that stood in stark contrast to the plain clothing she wore to blend, unnoticed among the revolutionaries. Etienne, she began, her voice low but unwavering, there is something you must know about me, about who I truly am. He leaned forward, the smudge of wax on his cheek catching the candlelight, his curiosity piqued but tempered with caution. You can trust me, Claire. She took a steadying breath. I am the daughter of the Marquis Dubois. My family is divided, some loyal to the crown, others sympathetic to the cause we fight for. I left everything behind to stand with those who seek justice. Etienne's heart pounded with a conflicted rhythm. The revelation was both a shock and a beacon. Here was a woman who risked not only her life, but the fragile bonds of her birthright for the revolution. Yet, with such a lineage, came danger, enemies within and without, suspicion from comrades, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. Why tell me now? Etienne asked, searching her eyes for any hint of hesitation. Because you need to know who you fight beside, Claire replied. Because our enemies will use every weapon they have, even my bloodline, to undermine us. And because I trust you, Etienne, you have been my confidant and my strength. Together, we must prepare for what is to come. Outside, a distant cry echoed the city, restless, alive with the murmurs of rebellion. Etienne felt the weight of her words settle upon him, mingling with the scent of melting wax that forever marked his days and nights. This was no longer a simple fight. It was a battle woven with the threads of loyalty, sacrifice, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Days passed in a blur of whispered meetings and hurried preparations. Claire's resolve only deepened as she took to rallying their allies, her voice ringing with passionate conviction amidst the cramped quarters of their secret gatherings. Her noble background, once a secret to most, became a double-edged sword, inspiring some, sowing doubt in others. Yet her unwavering dedication broke through skepticism like a beacon through fog. At one such meeting, the small room buzzed with tension and hope. Revolutionaries from various quarters leaned in as Claire spoke, her words slicing through the uncertainty. We stand on the edge of a new dawn, she declared. Our fight is not only against tyranny, but against the fear that would keep us silent. I have walked both worlds, the gilded halls of nobility and the shadowed streets of Paris. I know the cost of silence, and I choose to speak, to act, to fight. A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd, the fire within them stoked anew. Etienne watched, pride and admiration swelling alongside a fierce protectiveness. Here was a woman who bore the scars of divided loyalty, yet her spirit burned brighter than any flame he had seen. Later, in the quiet solitude of the candle shop, Etienne found himself alone with the familiar scent of wax and wicks. The flickering lanterns cast moving patterns on the walls, shadows that seemed to echo the turmoil within his heart. Claire's revelation had unsettled him, yet it had also galvanized his purpose. He traced the rim of a lantern with steady fingers, feeling the weight of the messages it might carry, the silent words that could alter the fate of a city. You carry more than wax and flame. Jacques Lambert's voice came softly from the doorway. The older man's presence a balm to Etienne's restless thoughts. You carry hope, Etienne, and with hope comes great burden. Etienne looked up, meeting Jacques' kindly gaze. Her secret. It complicates everything. How can we trust when the enemy lurks so close? Jacques smiled faintly, the lines of age deepening with the wisdom of years. Trust is a fragile lantern in a storm, but it is also the light that guides us through the darkest nights. Remember that even fire, with its power to destroy, can also kindle warmth and courage. The candlelight flickered between them, a silent testament to the fragile but unyielding flame of their cause. Etienne nodded, the resolve hardening within him like the wax he moulded daily. The road ahead was fraught with peril, and the shadows of betrayal loomed large. But Claire's courage and the bonds they forged would be their lantern in the darkness. As the night deepened, Etienne could hear the distant murmurs of the city, the restless heartbeat of a revolution gathering strength. With Claire by his side and Jacques' wisdom to steady him, he stepped forward into the uncertain dawn, ready to face whatever trials awaited. The light of the revolution, fragile yet fierce, would not be extinguished. The night had settled over Paris like a heavy velvet shroud, its darkness punctuated only by the soft, flickering glow of lanterns held aloft by shadowy figures moving through narrow alleys and twisting streets. Etienne Moreau's heart pounded beneath the coarse fabric of his worn shirt as he gripped the handle of his lantern, its pale light casting long, trembling shadows on the damp cobblestones. Around him, the city's restless breath was audible in the distant clamor of footsteps, murmured commands, and the rhythmic beating of drums that echoed off stone walls like the pulse of a living beast. Claire Dubois walked beside him, her auburn hair catching the lantern's glow, her sharp features set in resolute determination. She whispered instructions in a low voice, careful to keep her words from carrying too far. Once we reach the square, the signals start. Each flame a message, hope, warning, rally. We must be precise. Etienne nodded, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. These lanterns, once mere vessels of wax and light, had become the lifeblood of the revolution. Through their coded flickers, plans were whispered across the city, secrets passed beneath the noses of the aristocracy and their spies. Tonight, those signals would ignite the first flames of open rebellion. They slipped through the labyrinthine streets, the air thick with the scent of smoke and damp stone. The distant cries of sentries and the occasional crackle of gunfire underscored the tension, each sound sharpening Etienne's senses. His mind raced, recalling Jacques Lambert's steady hands and quiet warnings from earlier that evening. In the cramped workshop, Jacques had meticulously checked each lantern, ensuring every wax seal and coded pattern was flawless. "Remember, Etienne," the older man had said softly, "this is more than light. It's a beacon for those who dare to dream of justice." As they neared the central square, the city's heartbeat quickened. Lanterns appeared in windows, on balconies, and in the hands of gathered revolutionaries, their flames flickering like a constellation of defiance against the oppressive darkness. Etienne's breath caught as he caught sight of Count Henry de Villiers, standing atop a balcony of his grand estate, his tall figure silhouetted against the opulent glow of candlelight. The Count's eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the streets below, wary of the rising tide that threatened to sweep away his world. The first signal fled a sudden, deliberate wave of light from Etienne's lantern. It passed through the ranks like wildfire, each flame responding in kind, weaving a luminous tapestry that pulsed with urgency and hope. The revolutionaries surged forward, their footsteps pounding pavement, voices rising in a chorus of rebellion. Etienne felt the heat of the moment burn through him, a fierce resolve replacing the lingering fear. Amid the chaos, the lanterns became more than instruments. They were symbols of the city's soul, tiny fires of resistance against centuries of tyranny. Etienne's eyes burned with tears and soot as he moved with the crowd, every flicker of flame a promise that justice might yet prevail. But the night was far from over. The battle for Paris had begun, and with it, the fragile hope for a new dawn. Etienne knew that every step forward would be paid for in sacrifice and blood. Yet the lantern's light endured, a guiding flame in the encroaching darkness. As the first volleys echoed and the streets ignited with the clash of ideals and steel, Etienne's thoughts returned to Jacques' words. "Hold fast to the light, the mentor had urged. Even when all seems lost, the light endures. And so it did, flickering bravely against the night, the siege of Paris unfolding beneath its unwavering glow. The air was thick with smoke, acrid and choking. As the fires of rebellion consumed the once quiet streets of Paris, Etienne Moreau moved swiftly, his breath ragged beneath the soot-streaked face that bore both grime and determination. Around him, the city writhed in turmoil. Flames licked the timbers of houses, their orange tongues clawing at the night sky, while the sharp crack of musket fire echoed through the labyrinthine alleys. The scent of burning wood mixed with the temps of sweat and fear that clung to every rebel and royalist alike. Clutching a fragile wax lantern close to his chest, Etienne's steady hands trembled, just slightly not from doubt, but from the weight of responsibility. Hidden inside the lantern was a coded message, vital to the revolution's next move. The wax that once served as his mundane craft now held secrets capable of altering the fate of Paris itself. His heart pounded in rhythm with the distant cries of battle, each beat a call to courage. Navigating through the maze of barricades and fallen debris, Etienne's sharp eyes scanned every shadow, every flicker of light that might betray an enemy's presence. The city he had known as a place of quiet routine was now a battleground where every step could mean life or death. Yet his resolve burned brighter than the fires consuming the neighborhood. Ahead, the faint murmur of voices drew him toward a narrow alley where Claire Dubois stood rallying a group of ragged revolutionaries. Her auburn hair caught the firelight, her sharp features set with fierce determination. She raised her voice above the din, weaving words of hope and defiance that cut through the despair like a blade. Etienne's presence steadied her symbol that the cause was alive and that their efforts were not in vain. "We hold the flame," Claire declared, "and as long as it burns, so does the promise of justice." The men and women around her echoed the cry, fists raised and voices rising in unison. Etienne felt a swell of pride and purpose. This was no longer a mere struggle for survival. It was a battle for the soul of a city, and each lantern he delivered was a beacon in the dark. Yet danger lurked at every corner. Count Henry de Villiers, the towering figure of the old regime, stood atop a hastily constructed barricade not far away. His aristocratic coat, embroidered and immaculate despite the chaos, caught the firelight as he surveyed the burning streets with cold eyes. Rage and a growing dread warred within him. The flames that threatened his power also illuminated the inevitable fall of a world he had long controlled. Beside him, Philippe Rousseau, ever the shadowy operative, whispered urgent reports of rebel movements and betrayals detected. Their plans were fragile, balanced on a knife's edge. Every act of rebellion was met with ruthless countermeasures, and trust was a scarce commodity. Inside the candle shop, Jacques Lambert stood at the doorway, watching the inferno unfold. His hands, once steady in shaping wax, clenched tightly as he observed the city's destruction. Age and weariness were etched into his face, but beneath lay an unwavering spirit. He worried not just for the revolution, but for Etienne, his apprentice, transformed from a boy into a man forged by fire and strife. As Etienne approached Claire, a sudden volley of gunfire erupted nearby. Instinctively, he dropped to the cobblestones, the lantern clasped protectively in his hands. Around him, cries of pain and defiance mingled with the crackling blaze. A young fighter beside him fell, clutching a bleeding arm, eyes wide with shock. Etienne's breath caught, but he forced himself to rise, pressing onward. "We need to move," Claire urged, grabbing his arm. "The commander awaits the message." Together they dashed through narrow lanes, the glow of their lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. Etienne's mind raced, every sense alert to the perils surrounding them. The coded message inside the lantern held instructions that could coordinate an attack to break the enemy's hold without it. The uprising might falter. Reaching a hidden courtyard, Etienne handed the lantern to a weary but resolute commander. As the man deciphered the code, a silent nod passed between them, a fragile hope ignited. The commander's orders sent waves through the rebel ranks, turning scattered resistance into coordinated defiance. But the price of courage was steep. As Etienne slipped away, a sharp cry pierced the night, a warning that their movements had been noticed. Gunfire erupted again, closer this time. Etienne sprinted, heart pounding, the city's inferno chasing his every step. Emerging into a wider street, he stumbled upon a group of royalist soldiers advancing. Without hesitation, Etienne darted into a side alley, the narrow space thick with smoke and heat. His lungs burned, but he forced himself forward, driven by the fire of conviction. Behind him, the city's flames roared, illuminating the faces of those who fought and those who fell. Etienne's courage, once tentative and cautious, now blazed with the same fierce intensity. In the heart of destruction, he found a light that no fire could quench, the unyielding spirit of resistance. As dawn threatened the horizon, the battle's roar softened to a grim silence. Paris lay scarred, its streets littered with the debris of conflict and sacrifice. Etienne paused, lantern in hand, to gaze upon the flickering flames that still burned. They were a testament to both the cost and promise of revolution. "This is only the beginning," Claire whispered beside him, her voice steady despite exhaustion. Etienne nodded, the weight of what was lost and what remained heavy on his soul. The flames of resistance had been stoked, but the path ahead was fraught with peril. Yet, within him burned a fire that would not be extinguished, a light to guide the city through its darkest hours. And so, beneath the smoke and embers, the fight for justice blazed on. The morning sun had scarcely pierced the heavy mist that clung to the narrow Parisian streets when Etienne Moreau found himself alone in the candle shop, the familiar scent of melted wax and smoke wrapping around him like a somber cloak. The flicker of a single lantern cast dancing shadows upon the worn wooden walls, shadows that seemed to echo the turmoil he felt within. His fingers traced the delicate curves of a recently crafted lantern, the faint impression of a secret message hidden beneath the wax catching his eye. Yet today, the usual careful inspection felt heavier, burdened by a weight that had little to do with the lantern itself. The past weeks had drawn Etienne deeper into the revolutionary cause, the coded lanterns becoming his lifeline and his weapon. But with every message delivered, every secret unveiled, the stakes grew higher, not just for the city, but for those he held dear. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden, hurried entrance of Lucien, his younger brother, whose pale face and quick breaths spoke of fear far greater than Etienne wished to confront. Lucien gasped, clutching the doorframe as if it might steady him against the storm raging inside. "They're searching the quarter. Soldiers. They're asking questions about you, about the lanterns." A cold knot twisted in Etienne's stomach. The innocence of his brother, once a shield against the chaos, now felt like a fragile flame threatened by the winds of war. Grasping Lucien's trembling shoulders, Etienne pulled him into a tight embrace, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. "You must be careful," Etienne whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of fear and determination. "No matter what happens, do not speak of what you know. Promise me." Lucien nodded, eyes wide but resolute. "I promise." The hours that followed were a blur of whispered plans and hurried preparations. Claire Dubois arrived as dusk fell, her fiery auburn hair catching the last light filtering through the cracked windows. Her presence was a balm to Etienne's frayed nerves, her fierce intelligence cutting through the fog of uncertainty. "We cannot let fear dictate our actions," Claire said firmly, her eyes locking with Etienne's. "Lucien's safety is paramount, but the revolution cannot falter. We must find a way to protect both." Jacques Lambert, the seasoned master candlemaker, lent his steady voice to the council. "The city is changing, Etienne. The cost is high, but your courage and wisdom will guide you. Remember, the flame of justice burns brightest in the darkest night." Despite their encouragement, Etienne's mind wrestled with the violence that now seemed inseparable from their cause. The streets echoed with cries and gunfire, the very fire that symbolized hope also threatening to consume all he loved. Each coded lantern he crafted now felt like a double-edged sword, an instrument of change and a beacon drawing danger ever closer. Late into the night, Etienne sat before a cracked mirror, the flickering candlelight casting fractured reflections of a man transformed. His face, smudged with soot and exhaustion, bore the marks of sleepless nights and hard-won battles. He saw not just the apprentice who once shaped simple wax into light, but a bearer of burdens that threatened to fracture his soul. "Is this the price of loyalty?" he murmured to his reflection, the question hanging heavy in the silent room. Yet, beneath the doubt, a steady flame of resolve burned. For all the sacrifices, the betrayals, and the threats, Etienne knew the fight for justice was not his alone, but the hope of all Paris. And as the city braced itself for the days ahead, he vowed to protect those he loved and the ideals that ignited the revolution's fire, no matter the cost. The night deepened, and the lanterns outside flickered like distant stars, silent witnesses to a city on the brink. Etienne's hands, though weary, were steady once more as he prepared a new message, one that would carry not only plans, but the unyielding spirit of those who dared to dream of freedom. And somewhere, in the shadows of Paris, the wheels of fate turned ever faster, drawing Etienne closer to a destiny forged in fire and bound by loyalty. The heavy oak door of the Villiers estate creaked shut behind Count Henry as he stepped into his private study, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows upon the walls lined with maps, letters, and the trappings of aristocratic power. His eyes, sharp and cold as steel, scanned every detail with meticulous care. Each map bore the marks of Paris's winding streets, the locations of barricades, and the known dens of revolutionary activity. The room was thick with the scent of old parchment and burning wax, the air heavy with the weight of impending violence. Count Henry's fingers drummed rhythmically on the desk, betraying an impatience hidden beneath his composed exterior. The revolution had stirred the city into chaos, but he was resolved to crush it with calculated precision. His network of spies, including the ever-watchful Philippe Rousseau, had secured valuable intelligence about the rebels' movements. Tonight, the plan would crystallize into a decisive blow. Meanwhile, far from the cold grandeur of Villiers' estate, Etienne Moreau moved with careful urgency through the labyrinthine alleys of Paris. The night air was thick with smoke and the distant cries of unrest. His slender frame was cloaked in a simple, soot-darkened coat, the lantern he carried glowing faintly with a pale, flickering light. Inside the lantern's wax-lined walls lay a coded message, beacon of hope and a call to arms. Etienne's footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestones as he glanced over his shoulder, every nerve alert to the possibility of danger. The city was a maze of shadows, and the old regime's guards prowled relentlessly. His heart pounded not just from exertion, but from the weight of responsibility pressing on his young shoulders. Each secret message he delivered could shift the balance between freedom and oppression. In a ruined church, not far from the bustling heart of the city, Claire Dubois waited silently in the moonlit nave. Her auburn hair shimmered softly under the cracked stained glass, and her sharp eyes flickered with both fear and fierce resolve. She watched as Etienne approached, the glow of his lantern cutting through the darkness like a fragile promise. They slipped into a shadowed corner, voices low and urgent. "Count Henry is tightening his grip," Claire whispered. "His spies are everywhere. Philippe Rousseau has infiltrated closer than we dared imagine." Etienne nodded grimly. "We must move faster, but more carefully. Every misstep could cost lives." Their plans wove through whispered strategies and shared fears. The revolution was no longer a distant dream, but a desperate fight for survival. Beneath the looming shadow of the old aristocracy, suddenly a sharp noise shattered their cautious dialogue, the distant clang of metal and shouted commands. Etienne's eyes snapped open. "They're here," he said, voice taut with urgency. They parted swiftly, each melting into the darkness as the front of a sudden ambush unfolded on a nearby street. Etienne darted down the narrow passage, the harsh cries of guards ringing in his ears. The cold steel of a sword flashed dangerously close as he twisted and dodged, the smoke and chaos swirling around him like a living fire. His breath came ragged, but the message in his lantern burned bright a fragile flame against the consuming night. As he vanished into the maze of Parisian backstreets, the stakes of his mission crystallized with brutal clarity. Under Count Henry's ruthless pursuit, every step was a gamble between life and death. Each lantern a symbol of the revolution's fragile hope. Back in the Villiers estate, Count Henry allowed himself a thin smile. The game had grown more perilous, but he thrived in the darkness. The old regime was fighting for survival, and he was determined to ensure that its shadow would fall long over the city's fate. Yet, as the flames of rebellion flickered stubbornly in the streets below, even he could not deny the resilience of the human spirit, nor the dangerous spark that Etienne carried. The night deepened, and Paris trembled beneath the weight of history in the making. Etienne's path was fraught with peril, but his resolve burned brighter than ever. Under the shadow of Villiers, the battle for the soul of the city would soon reach its fevered peak where courage, betrayal, and fire would decide the dawn of a new era. And as the city held its breath, Etienne pressed onward, the lantern light a steadfast guide through the consuming darkness. Etienne stumbled through the winding alleys, his lungs burning with each hurried breath. The muffled shouts of soldiers grew louder, their footsteps pounding relentlessly like the drums of war. He ducked behind a broken wall, pressing his back against the cold stone as the glint of bayonets passed mere inches away. His fingers tightened around the lanterns, handle a fragile vessel carrying the coded lifeblood of the revolution. Every nerve screamed for him to run, yet he forced himself to stay silent, heart hammering like a war drum in his chest. The streets were no longer safe. Count Henry's men prowled with ruthless efficiency, hunting the rebellion's flickering flame. Betrayal had seeded doubt, and trust was now a scarce commodity. A shadow moved across the street ahead of Philippe Rousseau, the cunning spy who had infiltrated the revolutionaries' ranks. Etienne's breath hitched as the man paused, glancing sharply around before melting back into the darkness. Rousseau's presence was a dagger in the side of the rebellion, a reminder of the dangers lurking within. Etienne's mind raced. To outwit such an adversary required more than courage. It demanded cunning and unyielding resolve. He recalled Jacques Lambert's words, "The fire must be tended carefully, Etienne. One careless spark can burn all to ash." The thought steeled him. The revolution was a flame worth every risk. As dawn approached, Etienne reached a hidden rendezvous inn, abandoned bakery where fellow revolutionaries gathered. Claire was already there, her eyes bright with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "You made it," she breathed, relief washing over her features. "The shadows grow darker," Etienne replied. "But so does our resolve. Count Henry thinks he can snuff us out. He's wrong." Their whispered plans stretched into the early morning, each word a promise forged in fire. The coming days would test every ounce of their strength and wit. The old regime's shadow loomed large, but so too did the light of change, flickering, defiant, and unyielding. The game for Paris had entered its most dangerous phase, and Etienne, the once naive apprentice, stood ready beneath that shadow, lantern in hand, heart ablaze with the hope of a revolution. The sun had barely risen when Count Henry convened his closest advisers in the grand hall of his estate. The room, adorned with tapestries and gilded mirrors, seemed a stark contrast to the turmoil ravaging the city beyond its walls. Yet the opulence could not mask the tension etched into every face. "The revolutionaries grow bolder," Henry began, voice low but commanding. "Their lanterns light up our streets like beacons of defiance. We must extinguish this fire before it consumes all we hold dear." An older man, his features lined with years of political strife, nodded gravely. "Our spies report that their messenger, a young apprentice named Etienne Moreau, carries vital communications. Capturing him would cripple their network." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Then he shall be our next prize. Rousseau, I trust you can orchestrate his capture without alerting the others." Philippe Rousseau inclined his head, a cunning smile playing on his lips. "Consider it done, my lord." As the meeting broke, Henry lingered by a window, gazing out over the city that writhed beneath his control. The flames of rebellion flickered stubbornly, but he was determined that the old order would not fall without a fight. The cost might be high, but the legacy of his family demanded nothing less. And so, beneath the shadow of Villiers, the deadly dance continued, one of fire and deceit, courage and betrayal, where the fate of Paris hung precariously in the balance. In the quiet moments before nightfall, Etienne found himself alone atop a rooftop overlooking the city's glowing horizon. The lantern in his hand cast soft light on his soot-streaked face, the wax residue a testament to countless hours of labor and peril. He thought of his brother Lucien, innocent and unaware of the dangers creeping ever closer. The sacrifices made by so many weighed heavily on him, but so did the promise of a new dawn. From the streets below, the distant rumble of gunfire and shouted orders reminded him that the battle was far from over. Yet amid the chaos, the lantern's flame burned steadier, symbol of resilience and hope. Etienne whispered a silent vow to the night air, to protect the light, to honor the sacrifices, and to carry the flame of justice until the shadows were banished forever. The revolution's heart beat fiercely beneath the shadow of Villiers, and Etienne was ready to meet its challenge head-on. The city's fate would soon be decided, and when the dawn came, nothing would ever be the same. The night deepened, and the streets of Paris held their breath, waiting for the inevitable clash beneath the shadow of Villiers. Etienne tightened his grip on the lantern, the coded message within burning with the promise of a revolution that refused to be extinguished. The game was perilous, but the flicker of hope was a light too fierce to be snuffed out. The fight for justice was only beginning. The tavern was thick with the scent of damp wood and stale ale, shadows dancing on the walls as flickering candle flames fought against the encroaching darkness. Etienne Moreau stood at the worn wooden table, his eyes scanning the faces before him, faces etched with exhaustion, fear, but also a hunger that no hardship could fully extinguish. The murmurs hushed as he cleared his throat, the weight of the moment pressing upon him like the heavy wax he once molded with steady hands. "Friends," Etienne began, his voice steady though his heart thundered in his chest. "We have walked through fire and emerged scarred, but not broken. The city may burn, but so too does the spirit that binds us. Each lantern we light is a beacon, a symbol that even in the darkest nights, hope endures." A ripple of quiet affirmation spread through the room, eyes brightening, shoulders straightening. Claire Dubois, standing near the back, caught Etienne's gaze and offered a slight nod of shared understanding anchored in countless sacrifices made and yet to come. She stepped forward, her auburn hair catching the candlelight, her voice soft but resolute. "We fight not just for ourselves, but for the future of Paris, for those who cannot raise their voices. Our cause is just, and our courage unyielding. Let the oppressors hear our whispers turn to roars." Outside, the night air was crisp, carrying the distant clang of metal and the muffled cries of unrest. Yet, in these moments within the tavern's walls, the revolutionaries found refugious sanctuary where hope was more than a fragile flame. It was a roaring fire rekindled by shared purpose. Claire moved through the marketplace with practiced ease, slipping notes into hands, her eyes meeting those of weary shopkeepers, young mothers, and laborers alike. Each note bore coded messages, plans for the next steps in their uprising. The hustle of the market masked these quiet exchanges, but beneath the surface, a network of resistance pulsed with renewed vigor. Etienne's thoughts drifted to his brother Lucien, innocent and vulnerable amid the turmoil. The risk was ever present, the cost painfully clear. Yet, as he saw the steadfast faces around him, he knew that their fight was not in vain. The flame of justice they nurtured burned brighter with every whispered word, every secret act of defiance. Later, in a narrow alleyway illuminated by the warm glow of lanterns swaying gently in the night breeze, groups gathered in hushed conversation. The closeness of their voices was a balm against the biting cold, their shared resolve a shield against despair. Laughter, a rare and precious sound, echoed softly, mingling with the crackle of distant fires. Under the star-strewn sky, Etienne and Claire found a quiet moment away from the restless city. The lantern between them cast a soft light, illuminating the lines of fatigue and hope on their faces. No words were needed. The promise in their eyes spoke volumes of courage yet to be summoned, of battles yet to be fought, and of a future forged in the flames of their struggle. As dawn approached, the city held its breath. The revolution, battered but unbroken, stirred once more. The flicker of hope that Etienne and Claire had kindled would soon blaze into a flame impossible to ignore. And though the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, the light endured steady, unwavering, and fiercely alive. The streets of Paris awaited their next move, and with hearts afire, Etienne and his comrades prepared to answer the call. The flickering lanterns were no longer mere tools of survival. They had become symbols of a revolution's undying spirit, lighting the way through shadow and flame alike. What would the coming days demand of them? How far would they be willing to go for the fragile light of justice? The night held its secrets tight, but the dawn promised a reckoning. And so, with hope burning bright, the revolution's next chapter was poised to begin. The candle shop's cellar, usually a place Etienne visited only to gather supplies or hide from sudden raids, now felt like a vault of secrets. That evening, as the city's unrest simmered above, Etienne knelt in the chilly gloom beneath the wooden floorboards, his breath shallow with anticipation. With trembling fingers, he pried away a loose plank. revealing a small cavity filled with carefully wrapped bundles of parchment. His heart hammered in his chest as he pulled them into the dim lantern light. The wax lantern's flickering glow cast eerie shadows, and the faint scent of melting wax mingled with the damp stone air. Each parchment bore coded messages, intricate symbols, and cryptic phrases that Etienne had only begun to decipher. But these were different. They spoke not just of battle plans and rendezvous, but of deep betrayals within the aristocratic ranks. Names, dates, and covert alliances spilled forth in the delicate script. Etienne's eyes widened. Here lay the proof that Count Henry's network was fracturing from within. That some trusted to the old regime were turning against him for their own reasons. Etienne hurried to share the discovery with Claire. They met in a crowded safe house, the air thick with the scent of sweat and whispered fears. Claire's fiery auburn hair caught the candlelight as she leaned over the parchments, her sharp eyes quickly absorbing the implications. "This changes everything," she murmured, voice low but fierce. "If we can confirm these names, we can dismantle his forces from the inside." Yet the weight of betrayal hung heavy. Every name was a knife in the back of the revolutionaries, but also a beacon guiding their path. The room seemed to contract under the pressure of their resolve. "We must move swiftly," Etienne said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But cautiously, one wrong step and we lose everything." Meanwhile, Count Henry paced in his grand study, oblivious to the crumbling loyalty around him. The roaring fire cast a sinister glow on his cold face as he reviewed intercepted letters, plotting his next move to crush the rebellion. His eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed no hint of doubt, but beneath the surface, a flicker of unease stirred. As Etienne navigated the rain-slicked streets later that night, lantern in hand, the coded wax symbols on the lantern's surface seemed to pulse with renewed meaning. Each step was a step deeper into danger, but also toward hope. The hidden flame within the wax mirrored the fire burning in his heart, a fire that no betrayal could extinguish. The revolution was no longer just a battle of swords and barricades. It was a war of secrets, trust, and courage. Etienne understood that the knowledge he carried was both a weapon and a burden. The fate of Paris might hinge on the fragile threads woven by these hidden messages. As dawn approached, casting pale light over the city's unrest, Etienne and Claire prepared to act. The revolutionaries had a new advantage, but the shadow of betrayal loomed ever larger. The next moves would be perilous, and the stakes had never been higher. Would the hidden flame guide them to victory, or consume them all in its unforgiving blaze? The night was far from over, and the story of the revolution's heartbeats flickered on, fragile yet alive. The soft murmur of the city at night was unlike the roar it had become in the day. Etienne Moreau stepped carefully along the narrow cobblestone alleyways of Paris, his eyes adjusting to the shadows that danced under the faint glow of the few remaining lanterns. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and damp stone, a reminder that this city, so vibrant in daylight, now bore the scars of unrest and quiet suffering. As he moved through the streets, Etienne's gaze fell upon a small figure huddled near the doorway of a modest Homer seamstress, her fingers nimble though trembling, passing a bundle of cloth and thread to a group of revolutionaries. Their exchange was wordless, the tension between them palpable, but the resolve in their eyes spoke volumes. This was a heroism that bore no fanfare, no cries of victory, only silent sacrifice. Etienne's heart stirred with a complex mix of admiration and sorrow. He thought of his own hands, calloused from crafting lanterns, now carrying messages that wove through this tapestry of resistance. These quiet acts, the sharing of supplies, the whispered plans, The risks taken behind closed doors were the lifeblood of the revolution, as vital as any battle fought in the streets. He paused, watching the seamstress slip away into the shadows, her face pale but steadfast. Not far away, the soft murmur of voices drew Etienne toward a small courtyard where Claire Dubois knelt beside a grieving woman. The mother's eyes were swollen from tears, her hands clutching a faded scarf that once belonged to her son, now imprisoned for his beliefs. Claire's voice was gentle, a balm against the raw pain that hung in the air. "He is not forgotten," she whispered, her words carrying the weight of hope and defiance. Etienne felt the swell of emotion rise within him, the knowledge that every loss was a wound in the heart of their struggle. As the night deepened, Etienne made his way back to the candle shop, where Jacques Lambert labored tirelessly. The older man's hands, though worn and shaking slightly, moved with practiced precision, molding wax and wick into lanterns that would soon carry the flickering light of rebellion to every corner of Paris. Sweat beaded on Jacques' brow, his breath steady despite the fatigue that clung to his bones. "Every flame carries a message," Jacques said quietly when Etienne arrived, his voice both weary and resolute. "And every message is a promise to ourselves, to each other, to the future." Etienne nodded, understanding more deeply than ever the significance of their work. These lanterns were not merely tools of communication. They were symbols of endurance, of the unyielding spirit that refused to be extinguished. Later, atop a crumbling rooftop, Etienne watched as a procession of citizens moved silently through the streets below. They carried lanterns, their flames deliberately snuffed out, leaving only the dim outline of the glass and metal frames. The somber faces of men, women, and children reflected the gravity of their undertaking. Though their lanterns were dark, their purpose shone brightly, a testament to sacrifice and unity. The quiet march was a poignant reminder that revolution was not only fought with weapons and words, but with the bravery of those who dared to stand together in the face of overwhelming odds. Etienne's thoughts drifted to his younger brother, Lucien, whose innocence was a fragile flame threatened by the encroaching darkness. The dangers that lurked in the shadows were real and relentless, but so too was the unbreakable bond of family and community that held them all together. In the days that followed, Etienne found himself reflecting on these silent sacrifices, on the countless acts of courage that often went unnoticed, yet were the very foundation of their cause. Each quiet gesture, each risk taken in the unseen corners of the city, wove a tapestry of resilience and hope that no force could unravel. The revolution was no longer a distant storm raging in the streets. It was a living, breathing force sustained by the hearts of ordinary people, and Etienne, once a naive apprentice, now stood among them, his spirit ignited by the knowledge that true change was born not only in the blaze of battle, but in the steadfast light of sacrifice. As the first light of dawn crept over Paris, Etienne tightened his grip on the lantern he carried, feeling the warmth of the wax beneath his fingers. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but within the quiet sacrifices of his fellow Parisians, he found a strength that would carry him through the darkest nights to come. The revolution was far from over, and the silent heroes of Paris would continue to light the way. But as the city stirred awake, Etienne could not shake the feeling that a new, more dangerous chapter was about to unfold, one where every sacrifice might be tested to its limits, and the true cost of freedom would be revealed once and for all. The flickering shadows of the lanterns seemed to whisper a warning. The flame of hope must never be allowed to die, and Etienne was determined to ensure it did not. The workshop was awash in a muted glow, the flickering candles casting long, wavering shadows across the walls lined with delicate lanterns, each a vessel of secret hope. Etienne Moreau sat at his worn wooden bench, hands steady as ever, moulding the wax with a precision born of years of humble apprenticeship. But now his task bore a weight far beyond the flickering flames he coaxed into life. These lanterns were no longer mere tools of craft. They were the lifeblood of a revolution. Outside, the city breathed with a restless energy, the distant roar of crowds and the sharp clatter of footsteps echoing faintly through the narrow streets of Paris. Etienne's eyes flicked to the cracked window, where the night's chill seeped in, mingling with the warm scent of beeswax and smoke. This was the crucible in which his transformation had been forged from a cautious apprentice to the bearer of clandestine fires. Claire Dubois's footsteps approached softly, a shadow slipping through the half-open door. Her auburn hair caught the candlelight, a vibrant flame against the muted hues of the workshop. She regarded Etienne with a mixture of respect and quiet urgency. "The message must reach the others before dawn," she whispered, her voice low but steady, carrying the weight of unspoken fears. Etienne nodded, lifting the freshly crafted lantern, its surface etched with the intricate coded symbols that only the initiated could decipher. "I understand," he replied, his voice steady, though his heart beat fast beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. "I am ready to carry this light where it is needed most." Their eyes met in a moment of shared resolve, a silent pact forged in the flickering shadows. Claire's sharp features softened briefly, a fleeting smile of encouragement before she slipped back into the night, lantern in hand, to join the swelling tide of rebellion. Back in the warmth of the shop, Jacques Lambert emerged from the shadows, his hands bearing the marks of decades spent shaping wax and hope alike, his gaze fixed on Etienne with a mixture of pride and caution. "You have come far, lad," he said, voice gravelly yet tender. "But remember, the flames we kindle can warm or burn. Be sure you carry the light, not the ashes." Etienne absorbed the weight of the words, feeling the steady pulse of his mentor's faith and the heavy mantle now resting on his shoulders. The revolution was no longer a distant murmur, but a roaring blaze, and he stood at its heart, the lantern-bearer, a beacon amid the encroaching darkness. As night deepened, Etienne slipped into the streets, the lantern's glow cutting through the thick shadows. The scent of smoke and damp stone filled the air, mingling with the distant cries and the restless stirrings of a city on edge. Each step was measured, each breath drawn with care, for the path he walked was fraught with peril. Yet beneath the weight of uncertainty, a fierce flame burned within him, fierce hope, tempered by the bitter knowledge of sacrifice. The lantern in his hand was more than wax and wick. It was a symbol of justice, a silent promise to the countless lives caught in the tempest of change. Through winding alleys and beneath shuttered windows, Etienne moved with quiet purpose, his every heartbeat echoing the rhythm of the revolution. Behind him, the city's fires blazed against the horizon, a crimson tide that threatened to consume all yet promised rebirth. In that fragile light, Etienne Moreau embraced his destiny, not merely as a maker of lanterns, but as the bearer of a cause greater than himself. The road ahead was uncertain, shadowed by danger and betrayal, but his resolve was unshakable. For in the heart of darkness, the lantern's flame endured, a testament to the resilience of hope. And as the first whispers of dawn began to soften the night, Etienne vanished into the city's restless veins. The light of the revolution carried steady in his hand, a beacon for those who dared to dream of justice. The acrid scent of smoke hung heavy in the air as Etienne Moreau stepped cautiously over the remnants of what had once been a lively Parisian street. Around him, the city lay scarred and broken, its cobblestones blackened by fire and its proud facades reduced to crumbling skeletons. The dusk sky, smeared with soot and ash, cast a dim pallor over the ruins, and the faint glow of embers flickered sporadically like dying stars scattered across the earth. Etienne's boots crunched against fractured glass and charred wood, each step echoing a hollow testament to the fierce conflict that had raged through the heart of the city. He paused, taking in the devastation with a sinking heart. The revolution, once a flickering flame of hope, had burned with a ferocity that had consumed both friend and foe alike. Now, standing beneath the ashen sky, Etienne felt the weight of loss pressing down upon him, not only the physical ruin but the countless lives, altered or extinguished by the relentless tide of rebellion. In this moment of bleakness, his thoughts drifted to those he held dear. Claire Dubois, with her fiery spirit and unyielding courage, had been a beacon beside him through the darkest hours. He recalled the fierce determination in her eyes as she had carried wounded comrades through the chaos, her hands steady despite the horror surrounding them. Etienne found her now tending to a young man whose face was pale beneath the grime, her fingers delicately probing a wound as a single lantern cast a warm glow over their sombre tableau. The flickering light painted Claire's features with a softness that belied the grimness of their reality. "We must hold on," she whispered, her voice steady but threaded with exhaustion. "For the sake of those who cannot." Etienne nodded, swallowing a lump of emotion that threatened to rise. The revolution was far from over, but the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty and pain. He moved on, his steps carrying him toward the remains of the candle shop where his journey had begun. The familiar scent of wax and smoke mingled in the air as he pushed open the charred door, revealing the shattered sanctuary where light and shadow had once danced. Inside, Jacques Lambert sat beside a small fire, the flickering flame casting a warm glow across his weathered face. The master candlemaker's hands, though worn and stained with soot, moved with practiced grace as he adjusted the fire's embers. Etienne, Jacques, greeted him, his voice low but comforting. "The city is broken, but the light endures." Etienne sank beside his mentor, the fatigue of battle weighing heavily on his limbs. How do we carry on when all we see is ruin? Jacques met his gaze, eyes shining with a quiet strength. Because the fire within us is more than destruction. It is hope, resilience, and the promise of a new dawn. We tend to it, protect it, and let it guide us. That is our charge. The words settled over Etienne like a bomb, soothing his restless spirit. He thought of the lanterns he had crafted, once simple tools for light, now symbols of resistance and connection amidst the darkness. They bore the secret messages, the hopes and plans of a people refusing to be extinguished. Night deepened outside, and Etienne stepped into the open air once more. From the ruins, he drew a small, carefully made lantern, its glass still intact and its flame steady. Holding it aloft, he whispered a silent vow to those lost and those yet to come. With steady hands, he released the lantern into the sky. It rose slowly, a solitary glow against the vast canvas of stars, drifting upward beyond the reach of smoke and ruin. The sight stirred something deep within Etienne, fragile ember of hope that refused to be crushed. Beneath the ashes of destruction lay the fertile soil of renewal. The city, the revolution, and the people who had dared to dream of justice would rise again. And Etienne, once a humble apprentice, would bear their light forward into whatever dawn awaited. But as the lantern vanished into the night, a whisper of uncertainty brushed against the edges of his mind. Could the fragile flame endure the trials yet to come? Would the sacrifices made kindle a future worthy of the cost? Only time would tell. For now, Etienne stood resolute, beneath the ashes, ready to rebuild the light. Paris was waking to a fragile dawn, the smoky tendrils of night still clinging to the narrow streets like a ghostly veil. Etienne Moreau stood on the edge of a cobblestone alley, his breath shallow and steady, eyes fixed on the dim glow of a lantern swaying gently in the hands of a cloaked figure approaching from the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and melting wax, punctuated by distant murmurs of unrest and the faint clang of metal from the city gates. Tonight, the revolution's pulse quickened. The tide was turning. Claire Dubois crouched beside Etienne, her auburn hair catching the flicker of lantern light as she scanned the contents of a folded letter. Her fingers moved deftly, tracing the elegant script and the cryptic cipher that had confounded many before her. "This confirms it," she whispered, eyes alight with a fierce resolve. "Count Henry's men plan to strike at the market district within 3 nights. We must warn the others." Etienne nodded, his heart pounding not from fear but from the weight of their responsibility. The coded messages hidden within the wax lanterns had become their lifeblood, each one a thread woven into the fabric of rebellion. What had begun as a simple apprenticeship in candle-making had evolved into a battle of wits and wills against the old regime's iron grip. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. From the grand mansions where aristocrats plotted in candlelit chambers to the cramped workshops and taverns where revolutionaries whispered their dreams, a quiet but relentless energy surged beneath the surface. Count Henry de Villiers, once a towering figure of power and privilege, now found himself besieged by forces he could neither fully control nor comprehend. In his opulent study, Count Henry sat brooding beneath the flicker of a single candle, its flame casting long shadows across the rich tapestry that adorned the walls. His fine fingers traced the hilt of a silver dagger, the cold weight grounding him amidst the storm of uncertainty. "They grow bolder," he muttered, eyes narrowing, "but the old order will not fall without a fight." Back in the alley, Etienne and Claire moved swiftly, their steps muffled against the stones as they delivered the intercepted message to a gathering of revolutionaries. Jock Lambert, the master candlemaker and Etienne's steadfast mentor, awaited them with a solemn expression. His hands, rough and stained with wax, held a freshly crafted lantern, its glass panels etched with a new cipher designed to outwit their enemies. "This will be our beacon," Jock said quietly, "a light to guide us through the darkness." As the revolutionaries dispersed into the night, lanterns in hand, Etienne felt the familiar burn of fire, both literal and symbolic, coursing through his veins. The city was aflame with change, and though the path ahead was perilous, the flickering lights of justice illuminated their way. Yet beneath this surge of hope lurked the ever-present shadow of betrayal. Philippe Rousseau, Count Henry's most cunning spy, moved unseen among the crowd, his eyes sharp for any sign of weakness. The game had grown deadly and the stakes higher than ever. Etienne's thoughts flickered to his younger brother, Lucien, whose innocent laughter had become a rare and precious sound amid the chaos. Protecting him and all that was good in Paris had become more than a cause. It was a sacred duty. The night deepened, and with it the revolution's heartbeat quickened. Etienne and Claire exchanged a glance, silent pact forged in fire and resolve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new betrayals perhaps, but also new victories. For the first time in many months, the scales of power began to tip. The turning tide was upon them, and with it the promise of a future forged in the light of their lanterns. But as the dawn approached, Etienne knew this was only the beginning. The struggle was far from over, and Count Henry would not yield without a final, desperate strike. The city held its breath once more, waiting for the next spark to ignite the flames that would shape its destiny. The night air hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and flickering candlelight as Etienne Moreau descended the narrow staircase into the cellar. Beneath an unassuming tavern in the Marais district, the muffled murmurs of voices rose from the gloom, a tapestry of whispered hopes and shared fears. Etienne's heart beat steady beneath soot-streaked cheeks, his fingers tracing the familiar weight of a freshly crafted lantern cradled in his hands. This lantern, like so many before it, bore the secret codes etched into its waxen walls, a beacon of communication in a city teetering on the edge of revolution. Claire Dubois awaited him among the gathered crowd, her auburn hair catching the dim glow like embers caught in a draught. The sharpness of her gaze met Etienne's with an unspoken question, and he nodded, steeling himself for the task ahead. Tonight was not merely another meeting. It was a forging of bonds, a weaving together of disparate threads into a tapestry strong enough to withstand the fires that threatened to consume Paris. As the last few stragglers settled onto rough-hewn benches, Jacques Lambert stepped forward, his worn hands raised slightly to command attention. "Friends," he began, voice steady despite the weight of uncertainty that pressed upon them all, "we stand at the precipice. The old world crumbles, and it is our hands, our voices, that must shape what comes next." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, eyes alight with a mixture of fear and fierce hope. Etienne glanced at Claire, who took a breath and stepped forward, her voice ringing clear and passionate. "We have seen the cost of silence. We have felt the sting of betrayal. But together, we can kindle a flame that no darkness can extinguish." The crowd leaned in, drawn by her words, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the lanterns hanging from the rafters above. Etienne felt a surge of pride and purpose swell within him. Here, in this hidden sanctuary beneath the restless city, the revolution was no longer a distant murmur, but a living, breathing force. Later, as the meeting dispersed into whispered plans and quiet embraces, Etienne and Claire lingered by the lanterns, their hands brushing briefly as they adjusted the waxen lamps. The simple contact spoke volumes, a promise of trust, a shared burden, and an unyielding commitment to the cause. Outside, the streets of Paris echoed with the distant clang of protest and the restless stirrings of change. Etienne knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril. Count Henry's spies prowled ever closer, and the spectre of betrayal loomed large. Yet, in the flickering light of their lanterns, he found a steadfast resolve. The bonds forged in fire would hold, and through them the dream of justice would blaze bright. As dawn crept over the rooftops, Etienne and Claire parted ways with a final glance, their spirits intertwined in a silent vow. The revolution surged forward, carried by the hands of those who dared to dream, to fight, and to believe. And in the heart of the city, the lanterns burned on symbols of hope, defiance, and the unbreakable human spirit. But even as the flames of unity grew stronger, shadows lengthened. Etienne could feel the tightening noose of Count Henry's machinations, and the fragile trust within their ranks would soon be tested as never before. The night had been a victory, but the dawn promised trials that would demand every ounce of courage and wisdom they possessed. With a final look toward the rising sun, Etienne whispered to himself, "For Paris, for justice, for the light that will never fade." And with that, he stepped into the awakening city, lantern in hand, ready to face whatever the fire of revolution would bring next. The city of Paris lay shrouded in darkness, save for the faint glow of lanterns that flickered like scattered stars across the rooftops and narrow streets. Etienne Moreau's breath came in sharp, measured bursts as he navigated the twisting alleys. The weight of the small wax lantern pressing against his palm, its flame sheltered beneath glass and metal. Inside, a coded message pulsed with urgency, the final signal that could unite the revolutionaries in a decisive strike against their oppressors. Every step Etienne took was a dance with peril. The scent of damp stone and burning wood mixed in the night air, while distant shouts and the rumble of marching feet echoed through the city. His dark eyes darted from shadow to shadow, alert for any sign of spies or guards loyal to Count Henry de Villiers. The aristocrat's reach was long, his agents like shadows that crept beneath doors and whispered in dark corners. Etienne's heart hammered fiercely against his ribs, not from fear alone, but from the weight of responsibility that had grown since the day he first discovered the coded messages hidden within wax lanterns. That discovery had thrust him from the quiet solace of the candle shop into the roaring tempest of revolution. Now, as the bearer of the final signal, he was the fragile thread holding together the delicate web of rebellion. He paused briefly beneath a crooked lamppost, the lantern's soft light illuminating the worn cobblestones. A distant clang of metal and a muffled curse reminded him that time was precious. He pressed onward, winding through streets alive with whispered plans and furtive movements. At last, he reached the rendezvous point, an abandoned warehouse near the Seine, where the core of the Revolutionary Command gathered under cover of night. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the sharp temps of sweat. Faces turned toward Etienne as he entered, their features illuminated by a sea of lantern light, fierce, hopeful, and resolute. Among them stood Claire Dubois, her auburn hair pulled back, eyes bright with determination. She stepped forward, voice rising above the murmur. "The time has come," she declared, her words a clarion call that cut through the tension. "With Etienne's message, we strike tonight. The lanterns will guide our attacks, signals blazing like beacons of freedom across the city." A surge of energy rippled through the crowd. Jacques Lambert, the seasoned mentor who had guided Etienne's moral compass, nodded solemnly. This is the moment we had prepared for. Outside, unbeknownst to the rebels, Count Henry de Villiers stood on his balcony, the cold night wind tugging at his cloak. His sharp eyes narrowed as he caught the faint glow of lanterns, lighting, in the distance, the unmistakable sign that the final signal had been sent. A bitter taste of defeat crept into his throat. Years of plotting, espionage, and oppression teetered on the edge of collapse. "They have lit the fire," he muttered, voice heavy with a mixture of rage and resignation. "And I fear it will consume us all." Back in the streets, Etienne led a small group of messengers, each carrying a lantern that would ignite the coordinated uprising. The crackling of flames mingled with distant gunfire, the city itself seeming to roar with the fury of change. Etienne's hands trembled slightly, not from cold but from the sheer intensity of the moment. Every flickering light was a promise of justice, of sacrifice, of a future forged in fire. As the first signals spread, revolutionaries poured from hidden enclaves, their lanterns casting long shadows that danced against the walls. The chorus of defiance swelled, voices rising in a chorus of hope and courage. Etienne caught Claire's eye, and in that glance, a world of shared struggle and unspoken promises passed between them. Yet, amid the chaos, danger lurked. Philippe Rousseau, Count Henry's most cunning spy, moved like a spectre through the crowd, seeking to snuff out the rebellion's flame before it could fully blaze. But Etienne's quick wit and knowledge of Parisian streets kept him one step ahead, weaving a path through the turmoil with unwavering resolve. In the heart of the uprising, Etienne's transformation was complete. No longer the cautious apprentice, uncertain of his place. He was the lantern-bearer, a symbol of the revolution's fiery spirit. The city trembled beneath the weight of change, its old guard crumbling like wax before the heat of justice. As dawn threatened the horizon, the final signal had been sent, and the fires of rebellion burned brighter than ever. Etienne stood amidst the roaring streets, the lantern's flame steady in his hand, a beacon not just of light, but of hope and the fierce, unyielding spirit of Paris itself. But even as victory seemed within reach, Etienne knew the road ahead was fraught with peril. Betrayal could still strike, and the cost of freedom might demand more than he had yet imagined. The night whispered its warnings, but the lanterns would not dim. They would guide the way through fire, through despair, into the dawn of a new era. And so, with the city ablaze and hearts united, Etienne stepped forward, the final flame of the revolution burning bright, lighting the path toward justice. The night hung thick over Paris, a velvet cloak pierced by the soft, unwavering glow of countless lanterns swaying in the hands of the city's restless souls. Etienne Moreau moved silently through the labyrinthine streets, his heart pounding in rhythm with the distant thunder of uprising. The time had come. The old guard, the aristocracy's last bulwark against the tide of change, was crumbling beneath the weight of its own arrogance and fear. The mansion stood before him, a relic of grandeur, now marred by the scars of conflict. Its stone walls bore the marks of rebellion cracks, like veins of defiance, windows shattered, and the faint scent of smoke curling from within. Etienne's fingers brushed the lantern he carried, the wax cool and steady, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. His eyes, sharp and determined, scanned the approach as shadows danced in the flickering candlelight. Inside, Count Henry de Villiers paced, the very image of cold calculation. His tall frame was adorned in the finery of a fading iritha, richly embroidered coat, the silver cufflinks catching the candlelight, his eyes piercing and unyielding. He was a man forged in the crucible of privilege and power, now cornered by forces he had long sought to suppress. His breath was steady, but the tension in his jaw betrayed the storm raging within. "They think they can topple centuries of order," he muttered, voice low and bitter. "But Paris will remember the price of rebellion." Philippe Rousseau hovered nearby, his presence a shadowy echo of treachery. "Their resolve is strong, my lord, but their unity is fragile. We still hold the cards." Count Henry's eyes narrowed. "Then we play our hand carefully. No mercy." Outside, Claire Dubois stood atop a barricade, her auburn hair catching the lantern light like a flame itself. Her voice soared above the tumult, clear and commanding, weaving through the cacophony of cries and clashing steel. For justice, for Paris, for freedom. The crowd answered with a roar, a sea of lanterns bobbing like stars, rebelling against the night. Among them, Etienne felt the weight of countless hopes and fears, the fragile threads of a future yet unwritten. The assault began with a thunderous crash as revolutionaries surged forward, battering gates and breaking through defenses. Etienne slipped through the chaos, his steady hands delivering crucial messages encoded within the lanterns, a silent symphony of signals guiding comrades through peril. Steel met steel in a furious dance. Jacques Lambert appeared beside Etienne, older but unyielding, his eyes alight with fierce pride. "Stay close, lad. The fight is not yet done." Within the mansion's shadowed halls, Etienne confronted Count Henry. The aristocrat's cold gaze met him, a clash of ages and ideals. "You think this ends with my capture?" Count Henry spat, voice laced with venom. "Paris will burn without us to tame it." Etienne's reply was steady, unwavering. "Paris will rise because of those who dared to light the way." Their struggle was brief but fierce, an embodiment of the revolution's fiery torment. As guards fell and the old order collapsed around them, Count Henry's defeat echoed through the city's bones, signaling not just the end of a man, but of an era. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose. Etienne stood amid the ruins, the lantern's glow now a gentle pulse against the awakening light. Around him, weary faces emerged from the shadows, survivors and victors alike, bound by sacrifice and the uncertain promise of tomorrow. Claire approached, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. It is over, for now. But the fight is never truly over, Etienne interrupted softly, eyes distant yet resolute. But tonight, we have won a battle for the soul of Paris. The city breathed deeply, its scars raw, but its spirit unbroken. The fall of the old guard was not an end, but a beginning, fragile flame flickering against the wind, demanding nurture and courage. Etienne's gaze lifted to the horizon, where smoke mingled with the morning light. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and hope in equal measure. But as the lantern's glow endured, so too did the promise of justice and renewal. And in that fragile light, Paris dared to dream anew. The dawn broke pale and tentative over Paris, its light creeping cautiously through the smoke-thickened air. Etienne Moreau stepped out from the narrow doorway of the candle shop, his boots crunching softly against the grit and shattered stones that littered the once bustling Rue Saint-Antoine. The city lay bruised and battered, scarred by weeks of fire and bloodshed, yet beneath the ash and ruin, there stirred a fragile pulse of life. Etienne inhaled deeply, the acrid scent of burnt wood and wax mingling with the fresh morning chill. His eyes, once bright with youthful curiosity, now bore the weight of hard-won knowledge and sorrow. He moved slowly, taking in the sight of collapsed buildings, shattered windows, and charred lampposts that had once guided Parisian nights. As he wandered the familiar streets, Etienne's thoughts were a tangle of memories of whispered plans carried in the lanterns he had crafted, of the faces of comrades lost and betrayals endured. Yet amidst the desolation, signs of resilience emerged. A small garden, recently tended, bloomed defiantly in a cracked courtyard. Children chased one another through the debris, their laughter piercing the silence like a fragile promise. He paused before a battered fountain, its waters murky but still flowing, and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The revolution had left its mark, but it had also kindled a fierce hope that refused to be extinguished. Returning to the candle shop, Etienne found Jacques Lambert already at work, his aged hands steady despite the years and trials. The old master looked up, his eyes crinkling in a tired smile. "You're late," Jacques teased gently, though the concern beneath his words was unmistakable. Together, they prepared a single lantern, carefully molding wax and fitting the glass with practiced precision. As the wick caught flame, the warm glow filled the small room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Etienne met Jacques' gaze, understanding passing silently between them. This light was more than illumination. It was a symbol of endurance and the promise of renewal. Later, Etienne met Claire Dubois on the banks of the Seine, where she stood watching the river's steady flow. The remnants of the uprising had left their mark on her face, a streak of soot on her cheek, eyes tired yet unyielding. She spoke softly of the future, of rebuilding not just stone and timber, but the ideals that had driven them into the streets. Their conversation wove between hope and pragmatism, a delicate balance between remembering the past and forging what was to come. Nearby, children played among the ruins, their laughter a stark contrast to the harsh realities that surrounded them. Claire's glance softened as she watched them, a flicker of something almost like peace touching her features. As evening fell, Etienne found himself before a freshly painted mural on a once crumbling wall, a vivid depiction of a burning lantern, its flames swirling with fierce colors of red, orange, and gold. The image stood defiant, a beacon amid the scars of conflict. Passers-by paused, some touching the mural reverently, others whispering names and memories. Etienne's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and solemn remembrance. The lanterns he had once made in ignorance had become enduring symbols of their struggle, of justice sought and sacrifices made. The light they cast would continue to guide those who dared to dream of a fairer world. Night deepened over the city, but within Etienne a steady flame burned bright. The revolution had taken much, but it had also revealed the unyielding spirit of a people bound by hope and courage. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but with each step Etienne knew they carried the embers of change, fragile, yet burning with the potential to ignite a new dawn for Paris and for all who called it home. As he turned to leave, Etienne glanced back one last time at the glowing lantern in the window, its light flickering softly against the dark. The journey was far from over, but the fire within would not be dimmed. The city had been broken, but from its ashes something new would rise, and Etienne, once a simple apprentice, was ready to help kindle that flame. The early morning light seeped softly through the narrow, soot-streaked windows of the candle shop, casting long, pale shadows across the worn wooden floorboards. Etienne Moreau sat quietly at his workbench, fingering the delicate glass and wax of a lantern freshly assembled. The familiar scent of melted tallow and beeswax mingled with the faint residue of smoke that still clung to the air. Reminders of battles fought and fires burned both in the streets without and in the hearts within. He looked down at the lantern, its gentle amber glow flickering steadily in the dimness. For so long, these lanterns had been mere tools of his trade, objects he crafted with careful hands while dreaming of a simpler existence. Now, each one bore the weight of history. Each flame inside was a testament to courage, sacrifice, and an unyielding search for justice. Etienne's mind wandered back over the years that had passed, from the moment of his first discovery, that hidden message within the wax, a secret code that had pulled him into the labyrinth of revolution and betrayal. He recalled the nights running through shadowed alleys, the whispered plans exchanged under the flickering street lamps, the faces of those lost and those who had stood beside him. Every moment had been a step away from the boy he was and toward the man he had become. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Claire Dubois entered quietly, her auburn hair catching the weak sunlight as she approached the bench with a small, hopeful smile. "Morning, Etienne," she said, her voice steady but gentle, carrying the resilience that had drawn him to her from the start. "Morning, Claire," he replied, lifting his eyes to meet hers. In those depths, she saw the mixture of weariness and determination that had come to define him. "I was just thinking about how far we've come." Claire nodded, kneeling beside him to examine the lantern. "And how far we still have to go. The city is healing, but scars remain." Etienne traced the cool glass with a finger. "These lanterns, they've become more than tools, more than messages. They're symbols of hope, of struggle, of everything we've lost and fight to keep, and everything we've gained," Claire added softly. "Your hands have given them life, Etienne. You shaped the light that guides others through the darkness." A knock at the door brought Jacques Lambert into the room, his presence steady and familiar. The elder craftsman carried a bundle of wrapped lanterns, his movements deliberate despite the weariness in his bones. "I brought these for the children's shelter," he said, eyes meeting Etienne's with quiet pride and a hint of sorrow. They need light now more than ever. Etienne rose to help, their hands working in practiced harmony. "You've always been the heart of this place, Jacques," Etienne said. "Without you, none of this would have been possible." Jacques smiled faintly, the lines on his face deepening. "It's not just about the lanterns, lad. It's about what they stand for. The fires that burn in us, the fight for justice, the hope for a better world. That is the true light." Later, Etienne found himself alone on a rooftop overlooking Paris. The city lay quiet beneath the soft blush of dawn, the horizon streaked with hues of rose and gold. Chimneys sent slender trails of smoke skyward, mingling with the cool morning air. The streets, once torn by chaos and fire, now thrummed with cautious life. Children's laughter floated faintly from distant courtyards, mingling with the calls of merchants preparing for a new day. He held a lantern in his hands, its flame steady despite the gentle breeze. The glow illuminated his weathered face, the dark hair tousled, the eyes bright but shadowed by memory. Etienne thought of his family, of Lucien, and their dreams for a future unburdened by fear. He wondered how to ensure the light they had kindled would endure, how to pass on the stories etched in wax and flame. The revolution had changed everything, the city, its people, and himself. But the fight for justice was far from over. A soft rustle behind him made Etienne turn. Claire stood there, the morning light catching the determination in her eyes. "The world needs that light," she said simply, "and so do we." He nodded, the weight of the past settling into a quiet strength. "Then let us be the keepers of the flame." Together they watched as the lantern's light flickered gently against the awakening city, a beacon in the dawn. A promise that though the fires of revolution had dimmed, their light would never be extinguished. The story of lanterns, justice, and sacrifice would live on, guiding those who came after through darkness and into hope. And so, in the heart of Paris, beneath the vast sky, Etienne Moreau embraced the enduring light, the legacy of a revolution, the cost of betrayal, and the unwavering spirit of those who dare to dream of justice.